Hey guys. This is part 2 of What If Naruto Died and the Kyuubi Took Over His Body. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 6, Getting to Know You. April 20th, 338 NE. -6:15 p.m. Hokage's office. Why is it, Dragon, the Hokage growled softly, that I find myself questioning the competence of my Anbu forces for the second time this week? Please enlighten me. The Hokage and Dragon were currently alone, even the standard squad that stood guard over the Hokage at all times dismissed for this particular meeting. Dragon was folded in half in a stiff bow, and had remained so since the Hokage first entered the room. The Anbu commander didn't dare face the Hokage at the moment, and so continued to stare at the floor, sweat dripping onto the mask that covered the ninja's face. Yes, Hokage-sama, Dragon said stiffly. It was determined that the arrest of Counselors Naoki Taniguchi and Harumi Kondo should be done quietly. We also wanted them to panic and possibly expose other conspirators or vital information. I had one Anbu squad waiting at each of their residences to arrest them once they arrived home for the evening. We also took the opportunity to search through their records for any evidence of treason or other crimes. Unfortunately, the counselors never arrived home. Both Taniguchi and Kondo tripped while walking down a set of stairs and broke their necks, although they fell in different locations. The Hokage rubbed the bridge of his nose as he tried to keep his temper in check. It beggars belief that both of them would just happen to accidentally die just before they were arrested for treason. Did you not have Anbu squads following them? I did, Hokage-sama. And? Neither squad reported anything unusual. However, our intelligence analysts have been going over the records we retrieved from their homes, and they have found an interesting pattern. Both Taniguchi and Kondo have been meeting with the chief of police on a regular basis, and often at the same time. I questioned the squads who were following them again, and both reported that Taniguchi and Kondo were approached briefly by a police patrol after they left the council meeting. The patrol consisted of 2 ninja, both Uchiha. Uchiha, the Hokage said slowly, as if tasting the word. Has an autopsy been performed yet? Were there any traces of genjutsu? The traces were faint, but they were present, Hokage-sama, Dragon replied. The Hokage was silent for several minutes as his mind churned, the pieces falling into place and painting an ugly picture. Fugaku's ambitions were well known among ninja and civilian alike, and the popularity of the Uchiha clan in general and Fugaku in particular had risen to new levels in the wake of the tailed beast's attack. Not for the first time the Hokage cursed Madara Uchiha. Fugaku's grandfather had been an incredible ninja, nearly as powerful as the first Hokage himself, but it was his cunning and foresight that had proved the most troublesome. Madara had insisted that the Uchiha be given sole control of the internal police within Konoha as a condition for joining the village. At the time, it had seemed like a meaningless concession to a man desperate for any sort of official recognition in the wake of his failure to gain the title of Hokage. The brilliance of the move had slowly revealed itself over the years, and it seemed to be reaching fruition now, long after Madara himself had passed away. By maintaining control of the police force, the Uchiha were able to keep their weaker ninja within the walls of the village where they would be safe and gainfully employed while still registered as active ninja in good standing. While the Senju would send their ninja out into the field to die, the Uchiha would remain home, safe and sound, steadily growing their clan's numbers. The results were plain to see. The Senju, initially more powerful and numerous than the Uchiha, had been whittled down to a single female member who was nearly past childbearing age and showed absolutely no interest in continuing her clan after the death of her lover. Meanwhile, the Uchiha had grown to become the most populous and powerful clan in the village. Only the Hyuga could claim to rival the Uchiha's numbers of active ninja. And that only due to a quirk of fate which allowed the Hyuga's bloodline limit to manifest in every member without fail, while the Uchiha bloodline activated in only a third of the clan's members. Fugaku had taken this advantage even further by actively currying favor with the civilian populace. The civilians were already inclined to trust the Uchiha as a matter of course, since the Uchiha were highly visible as the core of Konoha's police force. While other ninja were fighting and dying outside Konoha's walls to protect and strengthen the village, the Uchiha would parade in front of the civilians and occasionally break up drunken brawls or arrest a thief. Despite this disparity, the average civilian, if asked to name all the ninja they knew, would likely come up with two names: Hiruzen Sarutobi and Fugaku Uchiha. Even the legendary Sannin, Sarutobi's former students, were likely to be forgotten or overlooked, especially since none of them had been seen in the village in years, if for very different reasons. Now, less than a century after the village's founding, the Uchiha were poised to take control of the entire village and never let go. Sarutobi was willing to admit to himself that, taken solely on his own merits, Fugaku could probably handle the mantle of Hokage well enough, even if he lacked a true will of fire. After Minato's death, Sarutobi despaired of ever finding another ninja who could be a true successor. In his weaker moments, he even contemplated just turning the whole wretched mess over to Fugaku now and stepping back to watch the man deal with the headaches that came with the title he was so desperate to achieve. However, his own will of fire had not weakened so much that he was willing to just abandon his post to a lesser man. He had many years left in him, plenty of time to find a more suitable candidate, or groom one from among the veteran ninja. And that was the crux of the matter, really. Fugaku, for all his skill and political acumen, was not now and would never be an acceptable candidate in Sarutobi's eyes, because once Fugaku became Hokage, he would never let the title pass outside of the Uchiha clan. He would make sure his older son Itachi was groomed for the position, and he would fully expect Itachi to do the same for his children. Sarutobi would readily admit that Itachi had already proven himself a genius, graduating the academy at the age of 8 after only 1 year, 4 years before most students could even hope to. Only 2 ninja had accomplished this feat prior to Itachi, Kakashi Hatake and Minato Namikaze, both of whom had gone on to become S-rank ninja before they reached the age of 20. There was another more serious problem, one that Fugaku, and indeed Madara, had likely overlooked or ignored: the perception the other ninja in the village had of the clan. Even if Itachi proved even more capable than Fugaku, that would not change the fact that the other ninja would not accept the beginning of an Uchiha dynasty within Konoha. Since so many of the clan took permanent posts within the walls of Konoha, they had alienated their fellow ninja who had no choice but to take risky missions outside the safety of Konoha. Beyond the police force, which many ninja considered a joke, there were very few postings that did not require at least some experience in the field, and all of those were limited to the intelligence divisions. No ninja who had ever met a Nara would dare underestimate the power of solid intelligence and good planning, and many owed their lives to insights and secrets uncovered by the intelligence division. Conversely, no ninja who had ever met a member of the permanent police would dare allow themselves to become that weak and arrogant, and many refused to even acknowledge them as active ninja. The last problem with the Uchiha was their bloodline limit. Even with 2/3 of the clan never activating it, the clan as a whole was inordinately proud of the Sharingan, the so-called copy wheel eye. Once awakened, the Sharingan increased the effectiveness of an Uchiha ninja many times over, and that was without considering its more advanced uses and abilities. Even at its most basic level, the Sharingan increased the observational abilities of a ninja tenfold, allowing the user to pick up on subtle details and clues that they would miss otherwise. As the Sharingan matured, the user could track fast-moving objects with ease and even predict an opponent's actions based on the subtle tensing and shifting of their bodies. When fully matured, the user could actually copy any techniques they observed perfectly and reproduce them on command at any point thereafter. The average ninja would be willing to give nearly anything to obtain even one of those abilities, and the Uchiha got all of those abilities and more for simply being born. What concerned Sarutobi at the moment, however, was the last ability of the Sharingan, its ability to detect and even cast genjutsu, or illusion techniques. A skilled user could implant subtle genjutsu merely by making eye contact, and the technique would be nearly imperceptible to both the target and anyone observing. With the revelation of Fugaku's close involvement with the 2 counselors and their all-too-convenient deaths, it appeared genjutsu had been used to cause the accidental demise of the 2 counselors. And of course, it would be absolutely impossible to prove that the Uchiha had anything to do with it. Chakra signatures were fragile things to begin with, and it was nearly impossible to trace a genjutsu signature back to the caster at the best of times. Hours after the fact and with the death of the subject, it would be impossible. Of course, just because he couldn't prove it now didn't mean he couldn't put this information to good use. Dragon, I want the Uchiha in general and Fugaku in particular under observation at all times. If he meets with someone, I want to know who, why, and for how long. If he sends a message, I want a copy on my desk before he's done writing. If he so much as sneezes, I want to know about it before he's done wiping his nose. Understood? The Hokage's voice was calm and even, but the force behind his words was unmistakable. Dragon knew better than to protest the difficulty of keeping a ninja of Fugaku's caliber under such close watch. Oh, and Dragon? I think all of ANBU needs a little refresher course to keep them on their toes. Work out the schedule with Guy, but I want all of you, and that includes you, to undergo an intense training session. I have to allow my ANBU the chance to keep their skills sharp, now don't I? Dragon gulped, paling at the prospect of one of Guy's infamous training sessions. Hawk and Cat had already begun their training, and at the end of every day they were a quivering pile of bruises and pain, nearly crying at the prospect of waking up the next day to begin again. Yes, Hokage-sama, Dragon said. April 21st, 338 NE. -9:30 AM. Konoha's northern gates. Shikaku Nara hated getting up early. He hated getting up at all, in fact, finding mornings in general too troublesome to deal with. But his wife made sure that he would regret it if he was not out of bed by a time she deemed acceptable. He attributed her insistence that noon was not acceptable to the general insanity of the female condition. She had not been amused when he shared that particular insight. He let a small smile play across his lightly scarred face as he recalled the argument that had caused, or more specifically the mutually satisfying resolution to that argument. Most people didn't understand why someone so intelligent would say such stupid things where his wife could hear. Most people also didn't understand just how enjoyable the bit that came after the arguing was. He was pretty sure Yoshino knew that he started those arguments on purpose, but she certainly wasn't complaining either. He shook his head and returned his attention to the procession that was slowly approaching the large, open gates that led into Konoha. As the Jounin commander, he was deemed the most suitable representative to greet the Kumo delegation when they arrived. Having the Hokage greet them personally when the raikage was not part of the delegation would be seen as weak on Konoha's part, but as Kumo's Jounin commander was part of the delegation, anything less than his counterpart would be an insult. Shikaku wondered again why he had agreed to accept the role of Jounin commander when Kensuke stepped down from the position. He knew that it was largely a thankless job that involved lots of stress and paperwork and very little benefit. Oh, right. He was the best candidate, and knew just how important a skilled Jounin commander was to the continued safety of Konoha. And Yoshino threatened to make him sleep on the couch if he turned down the offer. Troublesome. He straightened from his customary slouch as the delegation finally reached the gates, his eyes sharp as he studied the group. He quickly noted that every single one of the 10 members of the delegation were ninja, and he suspected, given their age, the way they moved, and their general demeanor, that each was at least an A-rank threat. It seemed Kumo was taking this opportunity to show off a bit, subtly highlighting the fact that they had that many powerful ninja to waste on a diplomatic mission that required no particular skill. Even as he settled on that as the most likely scenario, his mind was sorting and ranking several other scenarios which called for the skills and power of 10 veteran ninja, the potential assassination of the Hokage foremost among them in risk, if not in likelihood. Kumo and Konoha had been on opposite sides in the Third Shinobi War, but their clashes were infrequent and the losses between the villages light. Light enough that peaceful relations had resumed less than a year after the end of the war, a stark contrast to the outright hatred IWA still held for Konoha. Those peaceful relations had led to the possibility of an actual alliance between the two villages and the purpose of the delegation's visit this week. Konoha's Jounin commander stepped forward to meet the leader of the Kumo delegation, a tall, thickly muscled man by the name of Katsuo Maruyama. Maruyama wore Kumo's standard Jounin outfit, a dark blue flak vest, a mesh undershirt with no sleeves, black pants fashioned of a warm, thick material the exact composition of which was a closely held secret, and black combat boots. A large sword was strapped to his back, and various pouches filled with gear festooned his body. His arms were covered in scars, to the extent that he had less unmarked flesh than he did scar tissue. His face was unmarked, however, and his thick jaw and brown eyes were currently set in a carefully neutral expression. Shikaku looked much smaller and ill-equipped in comparison. He wore Konoha's version of the standard Jounin outfit. The flak vest was a dark green, the mesh shirt had sleeves that stopped halfway down his biceps, the boots were replaced by sandals, and the pants were thinner and fashioned of a different material. But the outfit was otherwise identical. He only had 3 pouches on his person and no visible weapons, and he stood a full head shorter than his counterpart. His frame also lacked the bulging muscles of the Kumo ninja. The overall effect made Shikaku seem like a child compared to the Kumo ninja, which he figured was the entire purpose. He hated posturing, it was too troublesome to deal with. Fortunately, it was also too troublesome to act intimidated when he was already close enough to immobilize the entire delegation before they had a chance to respond. Greetings. I am Shikaku Nara, Jounin Commander. On behalf of Hiruzen Sarutobi, 3rd Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato, I welcome you to the village and bid you a peaceful and productive stay, Shikaku intoned formally. Katsuo stared at him for a long moment, looking for something and appearing slightly disappointed when he didn't find it. Nara, the shadow-wielding clan, he said finally. His eyes flicked downward, taking in their location. Due to the position of the sun, the entire delegation was bathed in the shadow of the tall gates. Katsuo's eyes narrowed slightly, but he gave no other reaction. The other members of the delegation shifted uncertainly as they heard Katsuo's words and also noted their location. We have heard many tales of your exploits in Kumo. Of that Shikaku had no doubt. Kumo technically had the largest force of active ninja in the elemental nations, but were only considered the 3rd most powerful of the 5 great villages. Their relative weakness, so Kumo believed, was due to the very small numbers of bloodline users in their village. Kirigakure no Sato actually had the most registered bloodline limits of any village, but most of their bloodlines were of limited utility. They still managed to maintain a reputation as the 2nd strongest village based on the prowess of the Kagaya and Yuki clans, along with their infamous 7 swordsmen. Konoha itself was acknowledged by all as the strongest village, and it was due in part to the power and versatility of their bloodline users, exemplified by the Hyuga and Uchiha clans. Kumo made no attempt to hide their interest in recruiting bloodline users, although so far they had failed to find any new bloodlines or lure a clan away from another village. Shikaku had no doubt that their interest in Konoha stemmed from their interest in Konoha's bloodlines and that Kumo hoped to lure a clan, or at least a clan member, away from the village in some fashion. However, their previous attempts had been relatively benign and Kumo in general had a reputation for straightforward and honest dealings, so the intelligence division rated the likelihood of a forceful attempt to be low. Looking at the assembled Kumo ninja before him, however, Shikaku shifted the odds of that approach a little higher, if still unlikely. I too have heard of you, Maruyama-san. They say you once killed 3 ninja with a single swing of your sword, Shikaku replied, allowing a bit of his usual lazy tone to leak into his voice. Maruyama grinned widely, revealing shiny white teeth. It was 4, he said. He appeared to be completely serious. Shikaku nodded slightly, accepting the correction without comment. He knew it really was 4. A Konoha informant had actually witnessed the event. Now he also knew Maruyama was a braggart, and was willing to give away information in order to maintain or enhance his own reputation. Useful information to have, and he would put it to good use in the coming negotiations. If you will follow me, I will escort you to your hotel. We have reserved the entire 3rd floor of the floating leaf for your use during your stay, and I hope you will find it to your liking. Once you have settled in, I will escort you to the Hokage's tower for the first meeting at noon. Maruyama nodded sharply. Very well. Lead the way, Nara-san. April 23 RD. 2:15 p.m. Yamanaka residence. Come on, Naruto. I promised Shika and Chuji I would introduce them to my new little brother. We can go visit them and be back before anyone even knows we're gone. Ino whined, pulling softly at Naruto's arm. Naruto steadfastly refused to move. Yamanaka-san was very clear that I was not to leave the premises for any reason until told otherwise. I believe he was worried that I would be recognized, Naruto said evenly. Ino sighed. She was very happy she had a little brother now, but she had already noted that he had a disturbing tendency to follow the rules. She frowned slightly, recalling her conversation with her father the first evening after Naruto had come to live with their family. Tuchan? Ino asked softly. She was technically supposed to be in bed right now, but she couldn't sleep while this question burned in her head. Naruto-kun doesn't look like he was hurt. After I broke my arm, I had to wear that arm thing for forever. Why doesn't he have one of those? Her father sighed, but sat up in his chair and motioned for her to come closer. When she was close enough, he picked her up and plopped her down in his lap. Well, sweetie, There are many different kinds of hurts. Sometimes the hurts are easy to fix, like your arm, even if it's not fun while that happens. Other hurts you can't see, but they can be just as bad or worse, and can take a long time to fix. Naruto has one of those kinds of hurts. It's on the inside, and it's going to take Daddy a very long time to help him. Oh, Ino said quietly. How is he hurt? He didn't answer for several seconds, and she was afraid she had asked a bad question somehow. Before she could say anything, however, he finally replied. He believes that he has to act like an adult, all the time. He doesn't think he's allowed to have fun, or act like a child, or even just relax. Part of how I'm going to help him is to let him know it's alright just to be a kid. I'm hoping you can help me with that. He could really use a friend, and I know you would be a wonderful friend. And an even better older sister, of course, he chuckled. Ino didn't fully understand the explanation, but she got the important parts. Have fun, help him act like a kid, be an older sister. She could do that. She could definitely do that. Well, here was a perfect opportunity to show her little brother how to have fun. Besides, little brothers were supposed to listen to their older sisters, so really she was fixing two problems at once. TSK, little brother. You should know better than to question your older sister. Kids are expected to break the rules sometimes. It's practically a rule of its own. Deciding to ignore the irony of her previous statement, she moved on quickly. And besides, if being recognized is the problem, you just have to wear a disguise. She clapped her hands excitedly. I have the perfect one in mind. I'm not wearing a dress, Naruto said immediately. Ino waved her hand airily. It didn't even look good on you. Your hair isn't long enough yet. Yet? Naruto asked, his tone faintly incredulous. Anyway, that's not what I had in mind. I've got a much better idea than that. 3:30 p.m. Nara compound. Shikamaru Nara was lying on his back, staring up at the sky as the clouds passed overhead. The familiar crunch of a potato chip and the crumple of the bag which contained them let him know that his best friend, Chuji Akimichi, was sitting next to him. Rabbit, Shikamaru said lazily. Another crunch. Duck. Another crunch. Table. Another crunch. A loud rustle as the bag was balled up and tossed aside and a new one opened. Roast chicken. Another crunch. Deer. Another crunch. Ino. A tree. Wait, what? Shikamaru quickly sat up and turned to look at Chuji. Chuji simply pointed off into the distance towards the entrance to the Nara compound. Shikamaru squinted. Sure enough, he could make out Ino and some other kid walking towards them. Ino was wearing a large sun hat that almost swallowed her entire head. She kept pushing it up out of the way as she stomped towards them, apparently having trouble seeing in front of her as it slid down her face. Behind her trailed another kid, this one wearing a bandana and sunglasses in what Shikamaru found to be such a blatantly obvious attempt to hide his identity that it was almost subtle. Given that Ino most likely came up with it, however, he settled on just blatantly obvious. Troublesome, Shikamaru muttered, and flopped back down on his back. He had already picked up his father's habit of saying that word, which had led to an argument between his mom and dad where she was actually angry instead of her usual amused angry. Ino didn't seem to appreciate his use of the word too much either, though Chuji didn't mind at all. That was why Chuji was his best friend instead of Ino. Well, one of the reasons anyway. As Ino continued to make her way towards them, Shikamaru began to make out what she was saying. Honestly, like I haven't been here loads of times before. And they were laughing. At us, Ino said. Technically, I think they were just laughing at you. They really didn't know who I was, the other kid replied. Not helping, Ino yelled. Sorry, Nei-chan, the kid said. Shikamaru didn't think he sounded all that sorry, though. He sounded more like he wanted to laugh himself. So this was the infamous little brother Ino had been raving about yesterday. Shikamaru was pretty sure they were both supposed to stay at the Yamanaka residence, although he was not at all surprised to learn that Ino had slipped out. Ino came to a stop in front of Shikamaru and Chuji, pulling the hat off her head as she stared at them for a long moment. Shikamaru still hadn't moved from his position. He was wearing a light blue shirt and black pants, and his black hair was pulled up into a spiky ponytail that stuck up from the back of his head in an imitation of his father's hairstyle, a style most people referred to as the pineapple. Chuji was wearing a green and white jacket with blue pants. His hair stuck up wildly in all directions and he had red swirl marks tattooed on both cheeks. He spared a quick wave to Ino and her companion before he returned to consuming his potato chips, already halfway through the freshly opened bag. Honestly, could you two be any lazier? You're supposed to at least stand up when a lady is present, you know, Ino said. Chuji looked vaguely guilty, but Shikamaru just snorted. When one shows up, let me know and I'll think about it. Why you? Ino sputtered indignantly. Shikamaru just chuckled to himself, and Chuji bit off another potato chip to cover up his own laugh. Anyway, aren't you going to introduce us? Shikamaru said, finally sitting up again as he looked at Ino's companion. Ino took a moment to recover, but she quickly brightened. Right. Shika, Chuji, this is my new little brother, Naruto. Naruto, the lazy one on the ground is Shikamaru Nara, and the one eating chips is Chuji Akimichi. The newly introduced Naruto pulled off the sunglasses and bandana, and then smiled at the two kids. Shikamaru and Chuji were both surprised to see blonde hair and blue eyes, and for a moment they wondered if Naruto really was Ino's brother. Blonde hair was highly unusual in Konoha, and Naruto's eyes were only a few shades off from Ino's. Shikamaru quickly dismissed that idea, but focused on the name. Naruto. I've heard that name before. My dad was talking about you. Something about ridiculous test scores. Naruto smirked slightly. I wouldn't say ridiculous, he said. Ino had no such problem. Yep. Totally ridiculous. I bet he's even smarter than you, Shika. Oh? You wouldn't happen to play shogi, would you? Shikamaru asked. His dad had taught him how to play the game, and while Chuji and Ino had shown no interest, Shikamaru still wanted to find someone to play against on a regular basis. His dad was perfectly willing to play, of course, but their relative skill levels were still too far apart for it to be anything other than a teaching exercise. Naruto hummed thoughtfully. I have heard of it, but I've never gotten the chance to play. If you want to show me the rules, I'm willing. Shikamaru grinned, and hopped to his feet with far more alacrity than most would expect him to be capable of. Follow me, he said, and moved off towards his house. Chuji pulled himself to his feet and quickly followed. Ino grinned and pulled Naruto along with her. Come on, it's time someone showed Shikamaru up, and you, little brother, are the perfect one for the job. 2 hours later, Ino was still crowing in delight. Ha! I told you. To be fair, Nei-chan, I only won once, Naruto said. Shikamaru just shook his head, still shocked by how quickly Naruto had picked up the game. And you just started playing. I've been playing with my dad for months now. You're really good. Shikamaru grinned, excitement shining in his eyes. I can still beat you though. Again? Oh, I think you've played enough for today, don't you? A new voice said. Ino paled dramatically and Chuji almost choked on his chip. Shikamaru just shook his head with a muttered troublesome. Yamanaka stood tapping her foot impatiently in the door frame. And just what, little lady, did you think you were doing sneaking out of the house in the middle of the day, And taking Naruto-kun along with you, no less. Naruto stepped bravely into the line of fire. I thought it was a rule that children were expected to break the rules on occasion, Kikuka-san? Naruto asked. Ino squeaked when Kiku turned to glare in her direction. Not helping. Chapter 7, Getting to Know You, Part 2. April 24th, 338 NE. -1:00 p.m. Yamanaka residence. Inoichi's office was situated on the ground floor of his home, tucked into a quiet corner. The furniture inside the office emphasized comfort over aesthetic appeal, and the decorations consisted of simple paintings of forest scenes from around Konoha with the occasional knickknack that held some personal significance to Inoichi. His desk was well-worn but also well cared for, the inevitable nicks and scrapes picked up over the years serving to make it seem homely rather than broken down. There were 3 chairs in the room, 1 placed behind the desk and 2 placed in front of the desk, currently positioned to face each other. Naruto was already perched on one of those chairs, his feet not quite reaching the floor, when Inoichi closed the door, activated the privacy seals built into the room, and then settled into the chair across from Naruto. He had a few pieces of paper and a pencil prepared to take notes during the session. Now, Naruto, before we begin, I want you to understand that, While these sessions are required, if at any time you feel uncomfortable or don't want to answer a question, we can cut the session short or move to a different topic. These sessions will continue for as long as needed, and I don't want you to feel pressured into anything. Okay? Naruto nodded. He had yet to say anything since he first entered the room. Inoichi let out a slow breath. He sincerely wanted to help Naruto, but he wasn't looking forward to seeing just how deeply Konoha's resident Jinchuriki had been scarred by his time in Anbu HQ. The pieces he was already aware of: the emotional detachment, the complete lack of concern for his own safety, the obsession with proving himself were bad enough. Right then, let's start with something recent, shall we? Naruto cocked his head a little to the side and looked at him curiously but remained silent. I understand you and Ino snuck out to the Nara compound yesterday. Inoichi stopped there, curious to see how Naruto would respond to the open-ended statement. He didn't have to wait long. I apologize for disobeying your instructions, Yamanaka-san. However, with the disguise I believe the risk of exposure to be minimal. Inoichi kept his face calm and pleasantly curious, suppressing his wince. Though expected, it was painful to know that Naruto still viewed the situation as a mission. His continued insistence on calling him Yamanaka-san despite his easy manner with Ino and Kiku showed that Naruto viewed Inoichi as a superior officer rather than a parental figure. These sessions probably weren't going to help that particular issue either. As far as the disguise goes, you are correct. No one recognized you as Naruto, or even paid you and Ino any particular attention. You appeared as simply two children pretending to be ninja. Inoichi reassured him. However, what made you decide to risk it at all? Naruto shifted slightly, a small sign of nervousness or discomfort. Interesting. Inoichi made a note of this reaction. Naruto hadn't appeared nervous at all when apologizing, but the reasons behind his actions made him uncomfortable. Inoichi didn't pressure him, simply waiting for Naruto to answer or ask to move to another topic. At length, Naruto finally replied. I was curious. Ino had mentioned her friends before, and I wanted to meet them, Naruto said. Inoichi made several more notes. Ino had claimed that she pressured Naruto into it, almost desperate to make sure that no blame fell on her little brother, and now Naruto was subtly implying that he had come up with the idea on his own, transferring the blame to himself. To Inoichi's knowledge, this was the first time Naruto had acted protective of another person. Further, this was also the first time in nearly 2 years that Naruto had made any effort to reach out and form a connection with another child his own age. While Ino and Naruto were getting along far better than he had dared hope, they now lived together and Naruto did not need to make a special effort to establish or maintain a relationship. The same could not be said for Shikamaru and Shuji. And what did you think of them? Inoichi prompted after he finished writing his notes. Shuji was very quiet, but he seemed happy to be there and did not resent my presence. Shikamaru was very skilled in shogi. I look forward to playing against him again, Naruto said. He seemed to be finished speaking, but then hastened to add, the mental exercise could prove beneficial in the future. Inoichi's eyebrow raised slightly. Naruto apparently felt the need to justify his interest in shogi. Ino had already told them about the games Naruto and Shikamaru had played, as well as making sure to mention at least 50 times that Naruto had beaten Shikamaru. Inoichi decided to follow up on the shogi games for the moment. Is that the only reason that you look forward to playing again? Naruto shifted slightly again. No. It was fun. Challenging. Inoichi smiled. That's good to hear. Do you enjoy any other games? Naruto's head cocked to the side again. I don't know. And there went his smile. What other games have you played? A blank look. Checkers? Naruto shook his head. Tag? Another shake. Hide and seek? Another shake. Card games? Go fish, old maid? Poker? More shakes. Inoichi felt a ball of unease settle in his stomach. He knew from the reports that Naruto had not gotten along well with the other kids in the orphanage and that he eventually buried himself in his studies, but he had not realized that Naruto's isolation had been this complete. He fell silent as he contemplated just what effects that could have on a child, and what that would mean for Naruto. After a minute of silence, Naruto spoke. Yamanaka-san, I have a question about the interactions I observed between Shikamaru and Ino. Inoichi pulled himself out of his thoughts, cursing himself for getting distracted while he was with the patient. Yes. What is the question? He tried to recall if Ino had mentioned anything unusual about her time in the compound, but couldn't come up with anything. I noticed that they exchanged what should have been insults on multiple occasions, and that Ino delighted in Shikamaru's defeat when I won. I have observed similar interactions among other children before, but I always assumed that they were enemies or otherwise competing. Ino and Shikamaru seemed very friendly despite these insults. I don't understand, Naruto explained. Well, here would be one consequence already. Inoichi jotted down a few more notes before he leaned back in his chair. This explanation could take a while. Kushu smirked internally as the Yamanaka launched into his explanation of teasing. The question was half serious and half distraction. He understood much better than he let on what was happening, but this discussion would later branch into other areas of human behavior which he did not understand nearly so well. If he was stuck talking to this human for the foreseeable future, he might as well get something useful out of it. More importantly, focusing on how humans usually behaved would steer the conversation away from his own motivations and allow him to better explain his more questionable actions in the future. Considering the psychological training he would pull out of Inoichi during these sessions and the connections he was already forming among the most prominent clans in Konoha, joining the Yamanaka family was proving to be the best thing to happen to him since he was sealed. Now he just needed to prepare for his Mednin training with Shizen. For now, there was much to learn from Konoha. Once his strength had grown to acceptable levels and he had acquired all the knowledge and skills he cared to, well, that would be an interesting day. April 24 th. 1:30 p.m. Yamanaka residence. Ino was sitting in the living room helping her mother sort through the laundry. Despite the peaceful surroundings and pleasant day, she was uncharacteristically quiet and subdued. Her parents had not been happy at all that she had taken Naruto outside, despite the perfectly good disguises they had used. They had made it clear that Naruto could have been in a lot of danger, though they avoided specifying why exactly. It had taken them a while, but they had finally impressed on Ino that she could have gotten Naruto hurt again, and Ino had taken the revelation to heart. That didn't stop her from thinking about how to help Naruto, however. Naruto had only been with them for 5 days, but as far as Ino was concerned, he was a permanent part of the family. She had also had a lot more fun than usual hanging out with Shikamaru and Chuji when Naruto was with her. Despite their friendship, Shikamaru and Chuji were a lot closer to each other than either was to her, even beyond the obvious boy-girl differences. Naruto's presence evened the playing field. Even when he was playing shogi with Shikamaru, he still paid attention to her. It was nice to be included like that. She had also noticed that Naruto had enjoyed meeting Shikamaru and Chuji. He certainly didn't act sad or anything when it was just the two of them, but when the 4 of them were playing around, Naruto was more something. She couldn't quite describe it, but she thought the difference was what her parents meant when they said better. Even when they got back home and both of them were in trouble, Naruto hadn't said one bad thing to her, and she had been afraid he would angry or upset with her. In fact, he had even thanked her. Ino was certain that if she introduced Naruto to the other kids she knew, he would have more friends and get even better. But since he couldn't leave, that really left only one option. Ka-chan? Ino asked timidly. Kiku set aside the shirt she was folding and turned to face her daughter. Yes, Ino-chan? Do you think I could invite all my friends over for a sleepover? Kiku frowned. Now, Ino-chan, you know that you are being punished for sneaking out of the house yesterday. This is hardly the best time for you to have a party. But Ka-chan, it's not for me, it's for Naruto. When her mother didn't immediately reply, she rushed to explain her reasoning. You and Tu-chan both said that Naruto didn't have any friends before, and he had a lot of fun yesterday, and Shika and Chuji both liked him, and I know my other friends will too, and he'll like them, and then he'll have more friends and… Ino-chan, calm down, Kiku interrupted her. But Ka-chan… Ino pouted. I understand, Ino-chan, and I'm very proud that you are thinking of ways to help Naruto. I'm also happy that you decided to talk with me before doing anything this time. Ino blushed, but didn't say anything. I'm not saying yes, but I will talk it over with your father, and see what he thinks. Ino's smile lit the room, and she jumped over to hug her mother. Thanks, Ka-chan. April 26 th. 11:45 a.m. Hokage's Tower, Council Chambers. As the current session of the negotiations between Konoha and Kumo broke for lunch, and the various counselors began to stream out of the room, Inoichi called out to Hayashi Hyuga. Hayashi paused and turned, his pale eyes watching Inoichi approach curiously. Hayashi was a tall man, his form thin and well-muscled. His immaculately groomed black hair hung halfway down his back, gathered into a loose ponytail. He was currently wearing the traditional attire of the Hyuga clan, which consisted of thin layered robes of various shades of ivory and white. His headband hung around his neck, barely visible beneath his robes, leaving his unmarked forehead bare. "Yes, Yamanaka-san? Can I help you?" Hayashi asked coolly, his posture stiff and his tone polite, as it always was in public. Some people found this typical Hyuga attitude elitist or insulting, but Inoichi knew that the demeanor was at least partially a front. When Hayashi was among friends, he acted considerably more open and relaxed. "My daughter is throwing a sleepover party with her friends, and she wanted to invite Hinata-chan and Niji-kun. The event is planned for 2 days from now, starting that afternoon," Inoichi explained. Hayashi nodded thoughtfully. "I assume the Nara and Akimichi children will be there as well?" Inoichi nodded, pleased that Hayashi was at least considering it. In his opinion, the Hyuga children didn't spend enough time with children outside the clan, and this event would be good for them. Kiba Inuzuka and Shino Aburame have also agreed to attend. I am also planning to invite Sasuke Uchiha, but I wanted to ask you first. Hayashi smirked slightly. If Sasuke was next, then that also meant the Uchiha were being asked last. Inoichi knew him quite well, apparently. Hayashi didn't mind being asked second to last, since their families were not nearly as close as the others, but to be asked after the Uchiha would have been insulting. That aside, this party represented a gathering of every clan with a seat on the Konoha Council. Hinata and Niji would likely be working with these children for the rest of their lives, and it would be a good opportunity to form bonds with their future comrades. Hayashi did not immediately agree, however. That simply wasn't the Hyuga way. "I assume this event is prompted by your new guest?" "It was Ino's idea, actually, but yes, you are correct." I will need to think it over further, but for Hinata at least consider the invitation tentatively accepted. I will of course forward Niji's invitation to Hisashi." Inoichi knew that think it over further was code that meant Hayashi would talk the idea over with his wife Hisana, but didn't comment. He knew how that was, after all. "That's great, and thank you. I look forward to seeing them," Inoichi replied. If Inoichi and Hayashi had been paying more attention, they would not have casually dismissed the Kumo ninja lingering outside the doors to the council room, talking with a civilian counselor. They would have also noticed how his ears perked up at the mention of the name Hinata, and the calculating gleam that entered his eye as the conversation continued. April 28th. 2:00 p.m. Yamanaka residence. Kiku opened the door to find 2 members of the Aburame clan standing before her. Both were wearing the high-collared gray jackets and sunglasses typical of the clan, although the effect was less mysterious and intimidating on the 4-year-old. There it just looked adorable. "Hello Shibi-san, Shino-kun, I'm glad you could make it. Shikamaru and Chuji have already arrived, and they are playing out back if you want to join them, Shino-kun," Kiku said cheerfully. Shino nodded, falling short of the intended imitation of his father's manner and landing solidly in cute territory as far as Kiku was concerned. She smiled and watched him make his way through the house towards the back, then turned to Shibi. "I really am glad you could make it. Do you want to come in?" Shibi hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Kiku led him to the living room where Shikaku, Chuza, and Inoichi were chatting away, reliving some tale from their days as genin teammates. They all stood and welcomed Shibi cheerfully, bringing him up to speed on the current tale. So Ichi here got the bright idea that he would scale up the side of the building and try to use his mind transfer technique through the window. Mind you, the target was a civilian, but they were also hosting a party and the place was pretty crowded. He had just learned the technique and had been itching for an excuse to use it for weeks, and by Kami he had decided that now was his chance, Chuza said, barely keeping control of his laughter. Shikaku had no such problem and was already chuckling to himself. Inoichi had his head in his hands and was groaning, already dreading the rest of the story. Kiku rubbed his shoulder comfortingly, but her other hand was covering her mouth and her shoulders shook suspiciously every now and then. Shibi himself had never heard this particular story, and was most curious as to where it was going. "So Shika and I are keeping a lookout for him while he takes aim. He takes a good 2 minutes lining up his shot, and when he finally uses it, he immediately falls off the building. This much we expected, and we catch him and hightail it out of there, moving back to our own hotel room to wait for him to finish the job. About halfway there we realize something went wrong when he starts sucking his thumb. Shibi raises an eyebrow and his insects start a low rhythmic humming that the others recognize as the Aburaim version of a laugh. Inoichi just groans, knowing the story only gets worse from there. So we make it back to the hotel room, but Inoichi hasn't returned to his body yet. We figure that maybe he found a way to finish the mission anyway, and are ready to applaud his resourcefulness in the face of Chusa breaks off for a moment to get his laughter under control. In the face of adversity, he barely manages to choke out. But when he finally gets back an hour later, he's got a stupid grin on his face and no information on the target at all. Naturally, we don't let it rest at that. Shikaka takes over the story at this point, a sly grin on his face. Inoichi's head snaps up in panic as he realizes his wife hasn't heard the whole story prior to this, and that Shikaka doesn't intend to give the edited version this time. It turns out that he'd managed to miss his target and hit a baby instead. As if that weren't bad enough, it seems it was time for the baby to be fed, and he spent the entire hour breastfeeding. Inoichi winced as Kiku's comforting hand on his shoulder suddenly turned into a death grip. "Honey," she growled. Inoichi sent a death glare at Shikaku and Chusa, who seemed to be enjoying his discomfort immensely, then turned to face his wife with a pleading expression. In my defense, I was 13 at the time, and I fully intended to turn the situation to my advantage. He certainly did, Chusa choked out, before collapsing into laughter once again. To gather information, Inoichi said firmly, but the woman just put me in a crib and left. At that point I returned to my own body. Kiku did not seem at all swayed by this explanation, and if anything her hand tightened even further. Before she could say anything, however, another knock sounded at the door. "We will be talking about this later," she said as she left the room. This time when she opened the door she found 2 children waiting for her. The taller of the pair was a little shy of 5 feet tall and could possibly pass for a 12 or 13-year-old, though she knew he was only 9. His black hair was long and bundled into a thin ponytail that hung past his shoulders. He wore a black shirt and black pants along with ninja sandals, and covered it all with a black cloak. A ninja headband was worn around his head, the metal plate brightly polished and shining in the afternoon sun. He wore no visible weapons, but Kiku knew better than to believe any ninja, even one as young as this, was ever completely unarmed. The boy's onyx eyes stared into hers steadily, and Kiku found herself grateful for the excuse to look away as she turned to the other child. This boy was considerably shorter and wore a blue shirt and black shorts. His hair was cut short and slightly spiky, though it seemed he was trying to grow it longer in the back. His eyes, as black as his brothers and the rest of his clans, were alight with curiosity as he turned his head this way and that, taking in the new surroundings with a childish delight. Where his brother was cold and aloof, this child was open and bright, a very interesting contrast, Kiku thought. "Hello Itachi-san, Sasuke-kun," Kiku said. Most people would feel strange addressing a 9-year-old so formally, but with Itachi it felt stranger to address him any other way. "Greetings, Yamanaka-san. I have come to drop Sasuke off for the sleepover. I myself will not be staying long, but I would like the chance to visit, if that is acceptable," Itachi said. "Of course, come right in. Some of the other children have already arrived and are playing in the back." Itachi nodded and stepped into the house, Sasuke's hand gripping Itachi's cloak tightly as he followed. Itachi paused outside of the living room, observing the clan heads gathered in the room. Their laughter slowly died off as they noticed Itachi watching them. The silence stretched for a few seconds before Inoichi called out a greeting, quickly echoed by Shikaku and Chusa. Shibi nodded politely. Itachi returned the nod and bowed slightly before he turned and continued towards the back of the house. "That kid always creeps me out," Chusa said quietly. Itachi opened the door that led to the backyard to find the kids apparently caught up in a game of ninja tag. Ino Yamanaka and Shuji Akimichi were red-faced and laughing as they dodged Shikamaru Naruto's attempts to catch them. Shino Aburaim was currently circling around them as he kept an eye on Shikamaru. Itachi noticed a 5th child with blonde hair and blue eyes that he had never met before, but recognized as Naruto, the Yamanaka's newest guest. Naruto did not appear to have exerted himself at all, even though he was currently running back and forth throughout the area, moving teasingly close to Shikamaru before dancing out of the way, a small smirk planted firmly on his face. As Itachi watched, all the children began moving in slow motion, blue flickers of chakra dancing under their skin and ghostly images preceding their every move. Itachi was shocked to find that he had activated his Sharingan without even realizing it, but before he could turn it off his attention was drawn to Naruto. There were no ghostly images preceding Naruto's movement, and there were no blue flickers of chakra. Instead, his eyes showed Naruto surrounded by a red aura, appearing almost as if he were consumed in flames. The aura was far brighter than any child should be capable of, and certainly not a child who did not even appear to be seriously exerting himself. The aura pulsed in a regular rhythm, and as he looked closely, the three tomo that marked the activation of a fully matured Sharingan spinning madly, he could just begin to make out brief flashes of blue chakra. Every bit of the blue chakra was almost completely surrounded by the red aura, and they almost seemed to be intertwined, woven together. He had never seen anything like it in his life. When he was first informed of Naruto's status, an event that occurred the very day he activated his Sharingan, he had tried to determine what effect that would have on a child. From the descriptions of the seal, he had imagined an enormous reservoir of power, lying dormant and untapped within the child's body. This was not dormant. He was pulled from his thoughts as Sasuke tugged on his cloak, and he shut off his Sharingan before any of the children noticed. Although, judging by the look in Naruto's eyes and the curious tilt of his head, he may have been a little too late. The other children saw that Naruto had stopped running, and turned to follow his gaze. When they saw the two new children standing there, they called a temporary halt to their game and hurried over to greet the newcomers. The Uchiha did not have close bonds with any of the other families invited today, but the children had met Sasuke before. Itachi they had only heard about. "Hey Sasuke," Ino called out, waving. "Is this your brother?" Sasuke nodded a little shyly, still slightly uncomfortable among the children he did not know that well. "Yeah, this is Itachi and I-san." "Cool. I'm Ino Yamanaka. It's nice to holy crap, is that a ninja headband?" Itachi's expression did not change as he replied. "Yes. I have already graduated the academy." "That is so cool!" Ino yelled. Shikamaru and Shuji also appeared to be impressed, if the faintly dumbstruck looks on their faces were any indication. "Is that unusual?" Naruto asked, his head still tilted and his eyes focused on Itachi. Ino jumped in before Itachi could respond. "Very. That means he graduated after just 1 year, and he's already a genin. He's gotta be, like, super strong to do that. Hey, I bet you could do that too, little brother." She seemed excited for a minute, then suddenly looked worried. "But don't do that." She contradicted herself. "If you graduate early, we can't be on the same team." Naruto didn't respond right away, his eyes still fixed on Itachi. I'm not so sure, Ne-chan. I don't know if I'm strong enough to do that." Ino seemed to take this as a personal insult. "You are too. You could totally graduate in a year. I bet you could do it in like 6 months. She shook herself again. "But don't!" Itachi's eyes never wavered as he met Naruto's calculating gaze with his own. He had heard rumors of the intelligence of Naruto, although the boy was still far too young to evaluate the level of his physical skill and chakra control. Still, Naruto's gaze held nothing childish. There was curiosity, but no wonder. It was steady, calm, evaluating. It was a ninja's gaze. No, it was the gaze of a predator. His eyes itched to activate again, to use the power of his bloodline to dissect and examine the oddity that was Naruto, but now was not the time. He spoke again, his gaze still locked with Naruto's in their impromptu contest. "Sasuke, I will be heading out now. I must return to my duties. I will come by tomorrow to pick you up to return home." "Enjoy yourself," Itachi said. "But Nisan," Sasuke said, his voice not quite a whine. Itachi finally turned his gaze away, ignoring the feeling that he had somehow lost the contest as he turned to Sasuke. His right hand emerged from his cloak with his index finger extended. The hand slowly moved towards Sasuke before finally poking him in the middle of the forehead. "Foolish little brother," he said fondly. "Nisan! Don't do that," Sasuke said, rubbing his forehead. His voice was definitely whining now, and the other children stifled a laugh. Naruto watched their interaction curiously. Itachi shook his head and turned. He moved away in a quick shunshin, the world whipping past as he left the Yamanaka's backyard. He would need to think on what he had seen today. His instincts screamed that Naruto was dangerous. Even as young as he was, he found it ridiculous to think that a 4-year-old could be a threat, but he had learned long ago to trust his instincts. Those same instincts had led to him mastering his Sharingan years before most Uchiha even activated theirs for the first time, after all. If his instincts said Naruto was dangerous, then Naruto was dangerous. Now he just needed to figure out why. Chapter 8, The First Clue. April 29 th. -1:45 a.m. Outside the Yamanaka residence. Kaido Miyazaki had been a jounin of Kumo for 15 years, and he had very little to show for it. Oh, he wasn't hurting for money. He lived in a comfortable apartment, and had enough money saved for a rainy day, but those sorts of things didn't mean anything to Kaido. He craved recognition, the kind of recognition Maruyama got, even in a village as far away as Konoha. Kaido wasn't a particularly good ninja, but he wasn't a particularly bad ninja either. No bad ninja would ever survive long enough to make full jounin, and Kaido was actually above average as jounin went. And in one particular area he was far, far above average. It just wasn't an area that got a lot of attention or glory. It got plenty of respect among those in the know, but the very nature of his exploits prevented him from attaining the glory he so desperately sought. Kaido was an infiltration specialist, the best in all of Kumo in fact. But you don't go bragging to other villages or even your fellow ninja about how you stole secrets and successfully infiltrated enemy villages. So Kaido suffered for years under the irony of achieving incredible feats that benefited his village and not being able to tell anyone about it. Well, that all ended tonight. His original mission, the mission of the entire delegation in fact, had been to gather as much intelligence as possible on Konoha while the negotiations took place. As far as ninja affairs went, this was practically expected, and Konoha had actually done a very good job of subtly guiding their search for information in directions that seemed promising but were ultimately useless or meaningless. If Kaido hadn't been lucky enough to overhear the conversation between the Yamanaka and Hyuga clan heads, the delegation would likely have gained little information of value. In fact, under normal circumstances, even that information would have been considered irrelevant or useless. But where his fellow ninja would have seen a useless bit of trivia, Kaido had seen a golden opportunity. He had kept that bit of information to himself, and directed his intelligence efforts into discovering everything he possibly could about that sleepover. What he found was practically the perfect opportunity to cement his name into Kumo legend forever. The Hyuga and the Uchiha children would both be attending this party, outside of their heavily protected and fortified clan compounds. Even better, the event was taking place on the night before the delegation was scheduled to leave. If the plan worked out as it should, Konoha would be forced to release the entire delegation due to lack of evidence, and within the day he would be well on his way to Kumo with two of the most powerful bloodlines in all the elemental nations as his prize. He was practically drooling as he imagined the rapturous welcome he would receive when he reached his village. He watched as the last of the guards moved out of range and quickly dispelled the security seals guarding the window on the ground floor. As he had expected, each family had provided a ninja or two to watch over the house for the duration of the night, but the guards were relaxed and inattentive, secure in the knowledge that they were guarding an already highly secure ninja compound in the middle of a highly secure ninja village. Kaido would admit that the compound was well secured, and there were signs that the security was currently being upgraded even further, but he had dealt with far worse in his day. Static defenses were almost always less troublesome than human guards in his experience, and these guards were relatively pathetic. He grinned to himself as he slipped inside, carefully watching for additional security as he made his way towards the upstairs bedrooms where the children were sleeping. Kaido could perhaps be forgiven for overlooking the obvious flaws in his plan. The infiltration itself he had planned well, and his extraction plan was acceptable, if a little optimistic. However, if he had taken a more objective look at the situation rather than allowing his greed and ambition to cloud his judgment, he would have realized the political ramifications that would likely lead to the Fourth Shinobi War if he successfully kidnapped two prominent members of Konoha's most powerful clans. Of course, on this particular night, that was the least of his worries. Yamanaka residence upstairs bedroom. Kushu's eyes snapped open as a tantalizingly familiar scent wafted into his nostrils. It was incredibly faint, and it took him nearly a minute to finally place the smell, but when he did he almost unleashed a victorious howl. For the first time since his return to the human realm he had caught the scent of his brethren, two of them in fact, Saika the Two-Tails and Etsuzan the Eight-Tails. Given the age of the scent he knew that whoever or whatever currently carried it had not met them recently, but this was the first real lead he had gotten and he was not about to let it go. Swiftly but quietly getting to his feet, he stepped over the sleeping bags containing the other children as he moved towards the door. Pulling it open and taking a deep whiff to track down the new scent, he slipped out into the hallway. Behind him Ino rubbed her eyes tiredly as she noticed him leaving the room. She almost went back to sleep, but was curious as to what her little brother was up to and so got up to follow him. Kusha followed the scent downstairs into the kitchen, where he observed an unfamiliar ninja with his entire form concealed in black, form-fitting clothing. The ninja was incredibly quiet, his clothing barely making a rustle as he moved slowly through the room towards the stairs, but it was the scent that Kushu was following. Kushu spoke quietly so as not to alert the rest of the house. That could wait until he had gotten the answers he wanted. "If you answer my questions, I might be inclined to allow you to leave quietly," he said, hiding in the shadows and using his yuki to make his voice seem much deeper than it normally was. It wouldn't do for the ninja to realize he was being questioned by a child. The invader froze, spreading his arms slightly to show that he was unarmed. "Ask," he bit off angrily but still making sure to keep his voice low. "Where are you from?" "Konoha, of course. Where else would I be from?" Kushu inhaled deeply. I think not. You are definitely not from around here. I'd say you are part of the Kumo delegation." The way the invader stiffened slightly and refused to answer was all the confirmation he needed. Kushu nodded in satisfaction. "Yes, Kumo it is." "All right, next question. When and where did you last come in contact with a Jinchuriki?" "What?" the invader asked incredulously, and a little too loudly. There was a muffled thump from the hallway, and both Kushu and the invader froze. They both turned slowly to look at the door, then watched in disbelief as Ino walked into the kitchen rubbing her eyes tiredly. "Naruto, what are you looking for with the lights off?" she said, and flipped the switch. For a long moment both Kushu and the invader stared at Ino. She blinked her eyes again, then looked at the strange man that was standing in her parents' kitchen. Her eyes grew wide as the threat began to register, and her mouth opened. Then all hell broke loose. The foreign ninja moved in a blur as he rushed forward, his hands dipping into pouches tied to his legs. Kushu cursed loudly and sprang into action, channeling Yuki into his muscles to increase his strength and response time. As he leapt into the air, he found it curious that he had chosen to aim at Ino instead of attacking the invader directly. Then his body slammed into hers and she was thrown back into the hallway. Two kunai ripped into his body and blood flew through the air. Ino's strangled scream coincided with the shattering of the living room window, the front door nearly being thrown off its hinges as it slammed open, and a door upstairs being thrown open with a loud bang. Loud screeching sounds filled the house and chakra visibly rippled over the walls as multiple security seals were tripped and alarms sounded. The noise was almost deafening, but it certainly seemed to have done its job. Kushu watched in fascination as several indistinct blurs moved in the kitchen and hallway. One blur intercepted Ino and vanished from sight, presumably removing her from the battlefield. He saw another headed for him, but it was cut off by two blurs that locked together and dissolved into the intruder and a Hyuga. The intruder snarled and reached into his pouch for another kunai, but suddenly froze with his hand halfway there. The Hyuga's eyes were bulging, veins visibly throbbing around his completely white eyes showing that he had already activated his bloodline, the famous all-seeing eye, the Byakugan. His hands glowed faintly blue as they blurred through the air, striking the intruder with a series of featherlight touches. The intruder's eyes widened in horror and disbelief, and he remained locked in position for a long moment. Then the shadows around his feet suddenly thinned and he dropped like a puppet with its strings cut, unconscious before he even hit the floor. "Impressive," Kusha said, or rather tried to. The word escaped his throat in an indistinct, breathy gurgle, surprising him. He looked down and finally noticed the two kunai sticking out of his body, one lodged deep in his chest and the other sticking completely through his stomach. He allowed his attention to drift internally for a moment, and realized that the first kunai had pierced his right lung while the second had sliced through his stomach and only narrowly missed his spine. He detached his senses as the pain began to register and focused on repairing or at least stabilizing the body as best he could until a mezzanine arrived and he had a template to work from. The body's eyes drifted shut as it began to shut down, but its ears remained open and Kusha listened to the events occurring around him. "Get a fucking mezzanine in here right now, goddammit!" Inoichi screamed, ripping off his night shirt and pressing it to Naruto's body in a vain attempt to staunch the flow of blood. Barely a week in his home and already the boy was dying again. He spared a moment to be thankful that Ino wasn't present to see her little brother like this before he was shoved aside by an Anbu. He almost lashed out before he noticed the green glow around the Anbu's hands that signified the use of a medical jutsu. He let out a shaky breath as he stumbled to his feet, nearly slipping in the blood pooling around Naruto. "Kami, how did such a small body hold so much blood?" "Because that's all the blood he has," a small voice whispered in the back of his mind. He refused to even acknowledge the thought, and turned his attention to the piece of shit that had broken into his house and tried to murder his son. The blood began pounding in his ears as he stepped towards the man lying prone on the floor. That he was already unconscious was all that kept Inoichi from beating him to a pulp, though it didn't stop him from planting a vicious kick in the man's ribs. The Anbu stripping the man of any weapons and tools tensed slightly, but continued working without comment when Inoichi made no further move to attack. That didn't stop Inoichi from nearly decking the Hyuga guard when the man touched his shoulder to gain his attention. Inoichi's face twisted darkly. "How the fuck did that piece of shit get in my house?" The Hyuga guard was tense, but did not cower or back away in the face of Inoichi's anger. "It appears that the intruder slipped between our patrols and deactivated the security seals on the living room window in order to gain entry." Inoichi almost asked how the guard could know that, before realizing that his Byakugan was still activated. The all-seeing eye allowed the user the ability to see in all directions at once, greatly increased the range of the user's vision, and allowed the user's sight to penetrate solid objects. Despite appearing to look directly at Inoichi, the Hyuga could actually observe the entire house without moving his head, or even shifting his eyes. The Byakugan also allowed the user to see even the faintest traces of chakra. Most ninja could only see chakra when it was released outside the body in large quantities, but a Hyuga could even see chakra inside another ninja's body or even inside objects, an ability that they had used as the basis for an absolutely devastating taijutsu style. The Hyuga continued his report. "Judging by the residual chakra still draining from the seals, the intruder has been in the house less than 3 minutes. Given that he was in the kitchen at the time of his discovery, it would appear he was moving very slowly to avoid activating any of the internal security measures. As it was, he still needed to disarm the security seals at the bottom of the stairs, the top of the stairs, and any of the individual rooms." Inoichi nodded shakily. Despite the situation, the breach wasn't nearly as bad as it appeared. If Ino and Naruto had been upstairs, the intruder would almost certainly have been caught by the guards patrolling the grounds or set off one of the seals and alerted the entire household. Inoichi turned to find Ino and figure out why she and Naruto were out of bed when the Hyuga guard's eyes widened, an incredibly disturbing sight with the Byakugan activated, and his head turned to look up the stairs. Inoichi followed the Hyuga's gaze and his own eyes widened. Standing at the top of the stairs, faces white, eyes wide, and mouths gaping, were the other children. "Shit," he muttered under his breath, and quickly ran up the stairs to block their sight of Naruto. Once he reached the top of the stairs, he mustered the most authoritative voice he could without sounding harsh or angry. "All right, all of you go back to your rooms. The situation is under control and Naruto is receiving medical attention." He couldn't bring himself to say that Naruto would be fine. He knew mentally that Naruto had already survived being stabbed in the heart, but that knowledge seemed weak in the face of the scene he had witnessed downstairs. He noticed that the children were no longer looking downstairs, but now they seemed to be staring at him, faces still white and eyes round. Even as he looked down at himself and realized that the front of his pants from the knees down were soaked in blood and that his hands had smeared blood over part of his torso, and probably his face, he realized grimly, Kiku finally stumbled out of their bedroom, a robe hastily thrown on over her nightgown. As a civilian, even one married into a ninja family, she reacted far more slowly than Inoichi. He still wished she had managed to reach the hallway before the children, though he wasn't sure she could have handled the sight of Naruto any better than the children had. "Honey, what is going on, Kami? Inoichi, are you alright? What's happened? Where's Ino? Where's Naruto?" she asked, beginning to panic. Inoichi started to raise his hand to stop her, but realized that the sight of the blood probably wouldn't help the situation much. He settled for trying to talk over her. Kiku. Ino's fine, the situation is under control. Please help me get the kids back into their room. She nodded shakily and started gathering up the kids, ushering them back down the hallway. Inoichi was just grateful that she hadn't noticed the omission of Naruto's state just yet, though he didn't expect that to last long. The children were coming out of their shock and he could hear the sniffles starting as they began to cry. She'd learned soon enough that Naruto was most certainly not fine at the moment. After a quick stop in the bathroom to wash the blood off his face and hands, and another stop in his bedroom to get a fresh set of clothing, Inoichi made his way back downstairs. Naruto was no longer present, and the Hyuga guard Hiroshi, Inoichi finally remembered, confirmed that the ANBU had stabilized him enough to move him to the ANBU hospital. Again. Inoichi nodded, then set off to find his daughter. He found her in the living room, completely hysterical, while the Nara guard, Kuda, tried to awkwardly comfort her. Inoichi waved him off and sat down next to her, wrapping her in his arms. When she realized who it was, she started sobbing into his chest, muttering something over and over. He eventually made out that she was saying sorry. Ino, honey, it's not your fault. It's okay, it's not your fault, he kept repeating, and Ino slowly calmed down enough to speak coherently. What happened? Inoichi asked gently. It took Ino a few more seconds to gather her thoughts. I heard Naruto get up and head downstairs, and I followed him to see if he needed help or something. I thought that he, Ino started to cry again, and it was a few more minutes before Inoichi could get her to continue. By this time the other parents had begun arriving, their clothes hastily thrown on as they rushed over to see to their own children. Chusa and Shikaku had already checked on their sons and left their wives upstairs while they came back down to give Inoichi some support. They had seen the large amount of blood in the hallway and already noticed that only a single child was not present, and none of the other children appeared injured in the slightest. Their faces were grim as they sat nearby, listening to Ino. I thought that he might be looking to get a drink, or maybe he had a bad dream. I just wanted to help him. She looked ready to cry again, but pulled herself back together. I heard something in the kitchen and thought it was Naruto, but when I turned the light on there was someone dressed all in black standing there. The guy jumped at me, then Naruto came out of nowhere and pushed me back into the hall, and then there was blood everywhere and Naruto was Ino dissolved into tears again, and Inoichi let her cry it out. He'd gotten enough information. He felt strangely proud of Naruto. A little over a week ago Naruto's first response to danger had been to obliterate the threat. Now apparently his priority had shifted such that he was willingly throwing himself into danger to protect his sister. Inoichi blinked, startled at that thought. Apparently at some point in the last week he'd started thinking of Naruto as a permanent part of the family, rather than as just a patient, or the boy who was living with them. He also realized he'd thought of Naruto as his own son earlier. He tested the thought again. It felt strange and different, but also very right. He was worried that this change in perception would only make the loss that much harder to bear if Naruto did not survive. He'd seen enough trauma to know that the other children, especially Ino, would already bear scars from this night. If Naruto died, those scars would only get worse. 2:00 a.m. ANBU HQ Medical Wing. Shizen burst into the operating room and moved swiftly to the operating table. She had a full kit of her own medical supplies strapped to her body securely, but the rest of her clothes were hastily thrown on. Her shirt appeared to be inside out, and her pants were wrinkled. Her hair was pulled back with what appeared to be ninja wire. Status, Shizen snapped, her hands glowing green as she activated her own healing jutsu. One of the Mednin stepped back to allow Shizen better access to Naruto and brought her up to speed. He was brought in with 2 stab wounds, both caused by kunai which were still present in his body. We focused on removing the kunai in his lung first, and are currently working on stabilizing his breathing and slowing the blood loss. His chakra is reacting strangely to the treatment, however, and we are having trouble isolating the wound to begin the necessary repairs. Shizen cursed. Damn it, didn't you read the reports from last week? The Mednin shuffled uncomfortably and shook her head. You can't isolate his organs from his chakra or his body begins to shut down. Just ignore his chakra and focus on healing the wound. But what about the chakra reactions? The Mednin stuttered. Of all the get the hell out of the way, Shizen snapped, shoving the other Mednines aside. She focused both her hands on Naruto's right lung, moving the blood out of his lungs and slowly repairing the damage from the inside out. She may not have been involved in his last surgery, but she had made sure to question the Mednines involved extensively on what had happened and how Naruto's chakra reacted. As she expected, as her healing jutsu began its work, Naruto's chakra swirled around hers for a few seconds before moving to other parts of the wound. Even expecting it, she was still stunned by the speed at which Naruto's chakra healed the wound. In less than a minute his lung was completely healed, and as with the stab wound to his heart she could find no evidence that he had ever been stabbed at all. Forcing her wonder aside, she moved her hands to the kunai still lodged in his stomach. One hand gripped the kunai and slowly began to back it out, while the other healed the damage it left behind. By the time the kunai had been completely removed, the wound was purged of contaminants and was sealed tightly. As before, there was no sign Naruto had ever been injured there. She let out a relieved breath and slowly relaxed. An operation to heal wounds of that magnitude on a child would normally have taken hours and probably failed anyway. Once Naruto's chakra was allowed to assist, it took less than 5 minutes. Her mind drifted to the possibilities of such an ability if Naruto could do the same for other people. If he could, he would be far and away the best Mednine to ever walk the elemental nations, making herself and her teacher look like bumbling idiots. She resolved to push forward with his training as much as possible, regulations be damned. She was drawn from her musings when Naruto opened his eyes. "Hey, Shizen-chan. I guess you're the one who healed me this time?" he asked, his voice steady. She lurched forward and gathered him into her arms, holding him tightly as a few tears spilled down her cheeks. "Yeah, Naruto-kun. I healed you. You're all right now," she said, more to herself than Naruto. His hands patted her back gently as he returned the hug. "It's all right, Nei-chan. You're an awesome Mednine, of course you could fix me right up." The other people in the room just watched the scene dumbly, still shocked at Naruto's incredibly swift recovery. To them it appeared almost as if Naruto was comforting Shizen, rather than the other way around. 3:00 a.m. Yamanaka residence. Mikoto Uchiha was the last parent to enter the living room after Inoichi called for them all to gather. While Inoichi had nothing against her personally, he was disgusted to note that her husband had not bothered to show up in person. He didn't care much for Fugaku, but he had thought the man at least cared enough for his family to make sure they were safe and sound. Itachi, the nearly emotionless genius who had already become a genin, had accompanied his mother to the Yamanaka residence. Neither Mikoto nor Itachi said a word about Fugaku's absence, but the way Mikoto's fists clenched and Itachi's face tightened when his absence was commented on showed they were not particularly happy with him either. "Why are we here?" Some Inuzuka asked bluntly, her hair even more untamed than usual. She had at least taken the time to throw on her jouning uniform, though the vest hung open. Her canine partner, Kurama, was sitting at her feet. He kept sniffing the air as if looking for something, drawing the occasional curious glance from the other occupants of the room. "Not to insult you, Inoichi, but I'd feel much better if Kiba was back at home with me, and I'm sure the others feel the same." Inoichi waved off her concern. "I understand fully. I am not the one who called us together, however." Shibi adjusted his sunglasses slightly. No one found it the least bit odd that he was still wearing them in the middle of the night. Everyone in the room knew that the glasses were not worn for protection from the sun. "Then who called us together?" he asked. "That would be me," Sarutobi said, entering the room. The other occupants startled slightly but quickly snapped off salutes and polite greetings. Sarutobi waved them off impatiently. "All of your children were potentially threatened by the events of this night, even if it was Naruto-kun who bore the brunt of the attack. He is fine, by the way. Shizen-chan says he will make a full recovery." A small lie, since Shizen had said Naruto was already completely recovered, but the other people in the room didn't need to know just how fast Naruto could heal. Inoichi let out a shaky breath and wiped his hand over his face. He was most definitely not crying. He felt Chusa and Shikaku both put a hand on his shoulder and sent them a grateful nod. Sarutobi smiled at Inoichi briefly before his face turned serious again. "We have begun interrogating the intruder, but we already have a rather interesting piece of information: his identity." Grim faces stared back at him, waiting for him to continue. The intruder was Kaido Miyazaki, part of the Kumo delegation. As expected, the ninja in the room began to mutter angrily, hands twitching towards their weapons. Some appeared ready to rip the delegation apart with her bare hands, a feat she was certainly capable of. Unsurprisingly, it was Hayashi whose mind turned to the political implications. Are they going to demand that he be released into their custody? The Hokage smiled, his eyes glinting dangerously. Why would they need to? Kaito is still present in the hotel, after all. Clearly the man who broke into this house was an impostor attempting to frame Kumo and disrupt the treaty negotiations. As any good ally would, we will do all in our power to uncover the true identity of this ninja and inform Kumo. When they discover that Kaito replaced himself with a clone supplemented with a genjutsu, and that the intruder was in fact Kaito after all. Well, sometimes our interrogators go a little too far and irreparable damage is the unfortunate result. The other ninja nodded, understanding the Hokage's message. Sarutobi then looked at Inoichi directly. Your former apprentice might require your assistance, Inoichi. It would be a shame to deprive him of your guidance on this occasion. Inoichi shot to his feet, a genuine smile on his face. Understood, Hokage-sama. Thank you, he said, then vanished in a shunshin, heading to the torture and interrogation department. It was Shibi who asked the next question. What if the rest of the delegation was involved after all, Hokage-sama? There was nothing kind or gentle about the smile on Sarutobi's face. Then diplomacy will be the least of their concerns, he said. Chapter 9, Corrective Action. April 29th, 338 NE. 9:30 AM. Hokage's office. The Hokage will see you now, Maruyama-san, the secretary said, smiling politely. The Kumo ninja barely acknowledged her as he stepped past and pushed open the door to the Hokage's office. As one of the senior-most ninja in Kumo, he had of course been in the Raikage's office on many occasions, and he had always been curious what the other Kage's offices were like. He was a little disappointed to find that the Hokage's office was actually very similar to that of the Raikage, a desk stacked with paperwork, pictures of previous Hokages hanging on the wall along with one of Sarutobi himself, taken when he was newly appointed Hokage, judging by the youthful look, and several chairs scattered throughout the room. The couch sitting to one side was different though. The Raikage kept a collection of weights in his office so that he could exercise and maintain his strength while working. Apparently the Hokage favored napping on the job, Katsuo thought derisively. His evaluation of the office was interrupted when the old man sitting behind the desk looked up from his paperwork. Ah, Maruyama-san, I wasn't expecting you. I thought the Kumo delegation had already left earlier this morning, the Hokage said pleasantly. Katsuo felt another wave of disgust. The Hokage didn't even know when foreign ninja were present in his village? It appeared the skills of the so-called god of shinobi had dulled considerably with age. He kept his thoughts to himself, however. Unfortunately, one of the members of my delegation was missing when we awoke this morning. We waited to see if he would return on his own, but he has not. I am asking your permission and cooperation in searching the village to locate him, Katsuo said, gritting his teeth slightly. If he had his way, his fellow ninja would already be combing the village. However, even if the Hokage was a mere shadow of his former self, he had to remain polite. Kumo had a lot to gain from this alliance, and offending the old fool by stepping on his ninja's toes would erase all the progress they had made over the past week. Sarutobi blinked owlishly, looking surprised. Really? I wasn't aware that anyone had left your hotel since yesterday evening. Let me call my Jounin commander in and see what we can find out. Katsuo stifled his impatience as the Nara was called, shifting silently in place until he stepped into the room. Yes, Hokage-sama? Shikaka asked, bowing. Did anyone escort any of the Kumo delegation from the hotel last night? No, Hokage-sama, Shikaka said immediately. The Hokage turned back to face Katsuo. Well, that seems odd. Are you sure he isn't in the hotel somewhere? Katsuo's knuckles popped as he clenched his fists, but he held back his anger. This senile old fool was wasting his time. Absolutely, Hokage-sama. Well, that doesn't seem right then. Did your ninja leave the hotel on his own? Katsuo's frustration got the better of him as he snapped off his reply. It would seem so, Hokage-sama. The transformation from senile old man to battle-hardened veteran ninja happened in an instant. Then your delegation has violated the conditions of your stay within Konoha. Your group will be escorted immediately to the gates of Konoha, and a message sent to the Raikage demanding compensation for this trespass. It is unfortunate that one of your ninja would jeopardize the negotiations for the treaty in such a manner, but I will leave the consequences of that up to your Raikage. Katsuo was reeling in shock from the change in the Hokage even as he realized just how thoroughly their entire delegation had been played, probably from the moment they first walked into Konoha. A week spent with the kindly, slightly forgetful grandfather image had instilled a false sense of security and caused him to underestimate the old man, and now he had been lured into providing an admission of guilt out of his own mouth. He didn't know whether to admire their deception or curse himself for falling for it. As for your missing comrade, no one has turned up identifying themselves as affiliated with your group. However, we did make several arrests last night, and it's possible there was a mix-up of some sort, and that he was one of them. If you will provide a name and description, we will see if we can find him for you. Anbu. As the Hokage finished speaking, two Anbu appeared behind him, each grabbing hold of his shoulder and arm. They did not apply excessive pressure or seek to cause discomfort, but they made it very clear that they could immobilize him at a moment's notice. Escort Maruyama-san to his team, then escort the entire group to the northern gate. 30 minutes later, the Kumo ninja were waiting restlessly outside the gates of the village. Two Anbu squads had kept watch over them the entire time, and they were beginning to wonder how long the Hokage intended to keep them waiting. There was a small commotion near the gates, and Katsuo turned to see the Hokage and most of the clan heads from Konoha's council walking towards his group. They approached at a sedate pace, but Katsuo could see that their faces were tense and unfriendly, a stark contrast to their demeanor earlier in the week. "Ah, Maruyama-san. How nice to see you again," the Hokage said. Now that Katsuo knew it was an act, he actually found the grandfatherly expression on the Hokage's face a little disturbing. "We did manage to locate someone matching Kaido Miyazaki's description, but I'm afraid I have some bad news for you. It seems that Kaido broke into a clan compound and attempted to murder the child of one of our ninja clans. He was caught, but not before the child was gravely injured," the Hokage said, deliberately keeping the exact details vague. Katsuo's face paled as he listened to Sarutobi speak. This was bad. This was very bad. Kumo was strong, but they could ill afford a war with Konoha, especially if the village as a whole underplayed their strength as the Hokage had. That the village acknowledged as the strongest in the elemental nations could actually be even stronger than they appeared to be worried him greatly. Even if the situation did not lead to war, the damage to the negotiations and Kumo's potential alliance with Konoha would be considerable. He heard his fellow ninja tensing, and a couple even reached for weapons, and he barked a command for them to stand down. He kept his eyes on Sarutobi the whole time. The old man's face may be smiling and apologetic, but his eyes were sharp and watchful, almost eager. Katsuo shivered. He didn't doubt that part of the Hokage wanted them to attack whichever clan Kaido attacked, and he privately suspected that the Hyuga compound had been targeted. The Hokage and the clan heads were taking it very seriously. Katsuo licked his lips nervously before he spoke. "Where is Kaido now?" Well, that's some more bad news, unfortunately. Since Kaido did not identify himself as a Kumo ninja and did not have any identification on his person, he was taken to the interrogation department. It seems that he refused to talk, and I'm afraid that they got a little excited. Sarutobi gave a soft sigh. "Kids these days just don't know when to stop, do they?" he said, voice almost wistful. Katsuo felt Sarutobi's eyes boring into his own. The Hokage's tone may be light and conversational, but the underlying message was clear. Kaido had crossed the line and paid the price. It remained to be seen just what that price was, however. "Well, now that you know who he is, would you be willing to release him into our custody? I will personally see to it that the proper reparations are paid for his trespass," Katsuo offered. Instead of answering verbally, the Hokage snapped his fingers. Two Anbu appeared in a shunshin, dropped something on the ground in front of Katsuo, and vanished again. The Hokage's eyes never left Katsuo's, and Katsuo was almost afraid to look down. The retching sounds coming from behind him told him all he needed to know about Kaido's state. It appears there might be a small amount of permanent damage. Konoha ninja take a very dim view of anyone who attacks children, and that seems to have fed into their eagerness in the interrogation. Still, I just can't find it in myself to chastise them too severely. I feel much the same myself, after all, the Hokage said, his tone still pleasant. Katsuo nodded slowly. "I understand perfectly, Hokage-sama. Wonderful. I'm glad we had this little discussion. I will contact the Raikage soon to discuss our next steps, but I'm afraid given the circumstances that the negotiations will be on hold for now, Sarutobi said. His face changed into that chilling visage that made people remember just why he was known as one of the most powerful ninja to ever walk the elemental nations. Now get out of my village. 11:00 a.m. Hokage's office. Inoichi Yamanaka and Ibiki Marino were waiting for the Hokage to return to discuss the results of their interrogation of Kaido Miyazaki. They had already confirmed that the other members of the delegation had not been involved at any point of the attack, but they had found out a great deal of useful information that merited the Hokage's attention. They were chatting about some of the more surprising bits of information Inoichi had managed to pull from Kaido's mind. They were also trying to avoid thinking about what they had done to the man. Interrogation could be an ugly business, but they usually avoided dealing permanent or debilitating damage, especially to another ninja. It was an unwritten rule among the villages to avoid that sort of thing. It helped keep the violence from spiraling out of control in times of peace and possibly leading up to another war. The Hokage's orders on this matter were intended to send a clear message to Kumo that they had crossed the line. His earlier conversation with Maruyama underscored that point while letting the Raikage know exactly why Konoha had gone that far. It was a calculated risk on their part. Kumo wouldn't be happy and would likely demand reparations of their own for the treatment of their ninja, but they most likely wouldn't seek to retaliate otherwise. That the Hokage had left the rest of the delegation unmolested would help a great deal in lowering the tensions. For all the physical damage Ibiki had done though, it was Inoichi's contribution that was perhaps the worst. After pulling all the memories he could from the Kumo ninja, he had completely and irrevocably shattered the man's mind, leaving the body a soulless husk. In some ways it was a mercy, but Inoichi hated using his mind techniques like that. He was far more comfortable with his role as a mind healer, which was why he had left TNI in the first place. For this man though, he had made an exception, and even disgusted with himself as he was, he would do it again if someone ever threatened his family like Kaido had. They snapped to attention when the Hokage entered the room. Sarutobi waved at them to relax as he settled into his chair with a tired sigh. His rest the previous night had been cut very short, and he had been kept busy dealing with the aftermath of the attack on the Yamanaka household. He was also eager to get through this meeting so he could finally visit Naruto in the hospital. "Give me the most pressing information first, we'll deal with the rest another time," the Hokage commanded. Inoichi and Ibiki consulted briefly, and Inoichi stepped forward. Kaito was Kumo's foremost infiltrator, which explains how he was able to penetrate the security around the house with such ease. I was able to pull a great deal of information about the security of various villages and cities, including Kumo itself, from his mind. He also had 2 contacts within Konoha, a merchant and a waiter. We are prepared to take them into custody at any time. The Hokage thought for a moment. Not just yet. I want a report on what information they have provided and the likelihood that they could be used for disinformation before I make a decision there, he said finally. Understood, Hokage-sama. Moving on, Kaido actually overheard my conversation with Hayashi shortly after the council meeting broke for lunch a few days ago, which is how he originally learned of the party. He was able to gather additional details on his own and made his own plans for the attack. He intended to kidnap Hinata Hyuga and possibly Sasuke Uchiha and take them back to Kumo. He believed that doing so would cement his fame within Kumo forever, as well as greatly strengthening the village in the future when the bloodlines were firmly established. This appears to have been entirely his own idea. Kaido actually believed that the Raikage would be upset at his actions, but would forgive him and praise him if he was successful. Ibiki stepped forward next, motioning to the folder he held in his hands. We have compiled a list of Kaido's contacts throughout the elemental nations. We believe that if we act quickly we can eliminate, or even subvert a substantial portion of Kumo's spy network. The Hokage nodded, pleased. I will pass this information on to Jiraiya. He'll decide what to do with it from there. Excellent work, both of you, he said, then turned back to Inoichi. Were you able to get anything about his attack on your home? Inoichi shook his head. Unfortunately, no. The memory leech jutsu targets long-term memory, and the events of last night were not included. We have sufficient information from Ino and the guards to put together a solid picture of what happened. The only question at this point is why Naruto was downstairs at all. He often has trouble sleeping, however, so it would not surprise me if he was simply looking for something to drink or heading to the library. The Hokage nodded thoughtfully. He paused as a thought occurred to him. Inoichi, did Naruto use any of the tailed beast's chakra last night? Inoichi blinked. No, actually. He didn't, he replied, surprised. He hadn't noticed that detail in the frantic haze of the moment, or the constant worry that followed. Ino said that Naruto shoved her out of the way, so it may be that he was more focused on protecting Ino than killing his attacker this time, which could perhaps have made the difference. It bodes well for his eventual recovery if his priorities have already shifted, though I'm still worried about how willing he is to put himself into harm's way. Grateful, of course, he added hurriedly. Naruto saved Ino's life last night, but I'm still worried about him. Ibiki snorted. If the kid keeps healing as fast as he has the last 2 times, I'm not sure you can really call it harm's way anymore. He's already survived 2 attacks that should have killed him with not even a scar to show for it. Lucky bastard, Ibiki finished, muttering. Ibiki's face alone was heavily scarred, and the bandana he wore on his head covered an even worse sight. The Hokage frowned, turning a disapproving glare at Ibiki. He may heal quickly, but I'd much prefer he never get hurt at all, especially as young as he is. I am glad to hear that he and Ino are getting along as well as they have, and it gives me hope for the future that Naruto was willing to risk himself to save another. Still, he shouldn't have to make such decisions so young. The other ninja nodded in agreement, and they fell into a thoughtful silence. After a minute, Sarutobi cleared his throat and spoke. Well, unless there's something else that requires my immediate attention, I think it's time I paid a visit to our little hero, Sarutobi said. And then maybe I can get some damn sleep, he finished under his breath. Ibiki and Inoichi politely pretended not to have heard that last part. 2:00 p.m. Konoha General Hospital. Kushu was not sure how to feel about last night's events. On the one hand, the best chance he'd had yet to find information on the current whereabouts of any of his brethren had been interrupted by Ino's appearance, and he was rather annoyed about that. On the other hand, simply knowing that a Kumo ninja had been around them at some point in the last month or so meant that Kumo likely was still keeping them captive. His research had already determined that Saika and Atsuzan were last sighted in the land of lightning fighting Kumo ninja, but that information was decades old. This was the first time he'd found information that wasn't years out of date, and it also confirmed that he would be able to track his brethren once he was close enough. In retrospect, it was unlikely he would have gotten anything useful out of the Kumo ninja anyway, and his spur-of-the-moment confrontation likely would have ended very badly if the guards had found him talking with the ninja. Some very awkward questions could have come up that even now he wasn't sure he could have answered. From that perspective, Ino's interruption could quite possibly have saved his life. At the very least it kept suspicion off of him. So, did he actually owe her something? His musings were interrupted when the door to his room slowly creaked open, stopping when just a small crack was visible. He could see blonde hair and a blue eye peeking through the gap. He cocked his head to the side curiously. Ino-chan, what you are doing? A voice in the hallway asked in exasperation. The door suddenly opened fully, and Ino squeaked as she lost her balance and fell to the floor. She took a long moment to pick herself up, and even as she stood fully in the room her gaze was focused firmly downward. Kiku placed a firm hand on Ino's back and guided her over to Naruto's bed. Kushu watched Ino curiously. She had yet to look straight at him since she entered the room, instead sending quick glances his way then looking back down. Every now and then her body would tremble, and if he wasn't mistaken her bottom lip was quivering. What in the world was she doing? Ino-chan, what's wrong with you? You practically dragged me over here, Kiku asked, a little concerned. Ino had been desperate to make sure Naruto was alright, and she had not taken it well when she found out that Naruto wasn't allowed visitors at first. Kiku knew that Naruto had been in the Anbu hospital at the time, but the general population wasn't supposed to know that particular piece of information. Instead, the story was that he had gone to the normal hospital for treatment, and had only been recently moved into a room that allowed visitors. In addition, the full extent of his wounds had been downplayed while his recovery time had been inflated considerably. When Ino had heard that Naruto was finally allowed visitors, she had almost bolted out the door by herself even though she didn't actually know where the hospital was. The entire trip over she had pleaded with her mother to go faster, but once they actually arrived at Naruto's room her demeanor completely changed. Now she seemed almost scared to be here. Hey, Ino-ne-chan, what's wrong? You didn't get hurt, did you? Kush asked. The humans would not be happy with him if he had injured her. That question seemed to break Ino's resolve, and she threw herself onto the bed as she burst into tears. Kush patted her awkwardly as she clung to him. She was babbling as she cried, but he could pick out certain phrases that were repeated over and over. I'm sorry, and please don't hate me. He understood what the problem was a little better then, and knew the expected response. He unknowingly echoed Inoichi's earlier words as he rubbed her back and consoled her. It's okay, Ino-ne-chan. It's not your fault. It felt strange to realize how much the little human actually cared for him, and even stranger that he did not feel disgust at the thought. His relationship with this human could not possibly compare to the millennia he had spent with the Bijou or the centuries with his own tribe, but his mind began to recall those distant days when the Bijou were newly born. Even then, none of the others would have dared worry for him. Even then, long before they had understood their own immortality, he had always been the most powerful. It was his job to worry about them. He could still remember how it felt to worry about the others, though, the fear that these few beings, precious and familiar, could be taken from him never to return. He could remember the paralyzing terror that he felt when it seemed that his own little brother had perished in the first war, and the joyous relief that had come when he survived. And despite himself, despite his anger at the humans who had sealed him and stolen his brethren from him, he found himself thinking that perhaps not all of them were enemies. 10:00 p.m. Yamanaka residence, main bedroom. You should have seen them, Inoichi. It was the sweetest thing I'd ever seen in my life. Ino was bawling her heart out, and Naruto was hugging her for all he was worth, rocking her back and forth. I swear he was even crying a bit himself, Kiku said. She sniffled a little bit, and wiped her eyes. Are you crying? Inoichi asked teasingly. Kiku slapped him on the chest. Yes, I'm crying, and you should be too. I know it's only been a little more than a week, but I already feel like Naruto is part of the family. Ino absolutely adores him, and Naruto really seems to like it here. She cut herself off, looking a little embarrassed and unsure. Inoichi had a good guess as to what she'd been about to say, and he sat up and pulled her closer to him. You've even thought of him as your own son, he finished quietly. Kiku stiffened slightly, worried. How did you? Because I have too, he assured her. When I saw him lying there in the hallway, it was just like when Ino broke her arm, worse even. That horrible helpless feeling, he said. Kiku relaxed into Inoichi's embrace. Is that normal? To feel like this so quickly? Inoichi shrugged. Probably not, but do you regret it? Do you feel like we should let Naruto live somewhere else? Absolutely not, Kiku said immediately. Well, there you are. They lay there in silence for a while, thinking about all the changes Naruto had already brought to their life, and the changes that would likely come in the future. Kiku spoke again after a while. Inoichi, do you think you can really help Naruto? She asked uncertainly. Inoichi held her tighter. I will, he said, his voice full of conviction. I will. May 1st, 338 NE. -1:00 p.m. Uchiha Compound, Clan Head's Residence, Fugaku Uchiha's private office. I trust that you have learned to be a little more creative in your solutions in the future, Shinji? Yudai? Fugaku said. Yes, Fugaku-sama, they answered. The two Uchiha, the same Uchiha whom Fugaku had called upon to clear up his little problem with the civilian counselors, were currently kneeling on the floor of his office. They held themselves stiffly and their voices were tinged with pain, though they did not dare voice a complaint. Fugaku firmly believed that pain was the best motivator, and had thoroughly beaten his lesson into their bodies over the last week. He was similar to the Hokage in this regard, though the Hokage took far less pleasure in administering the lessons, and at least made sure that those being disciplined got some benefit from the experience. Fugaku just focused on the pain. He had not been amused to learn that both Naoki and Harumi had died while falling downstairs. It seemed that Shinji and Yudai had decided to each perform a genjutsu on one of their targets, but it had never occurred to them to coordinate their genjutsu or to make sure that they took different approaches. Such laziness and lack of foresight did not speak well of their skills, nor did it reflect well upon the clan as a whole. He dismissed them, and sat back in his chair as they stood and slowly hobbled out of the room. He would need someone else for such work in the future, someone far more skilled and thoughtful. Someone he could trust implicitly, of course, but still someone who was capable of thinking for themselves. The first name to enter his mind was Itachi, but he dismissed it just as quickly. Itachi would be wasted on such tasks. No, Itachi was destined for Anbu, and would give Fugaku his first source of information within the ranks of the Hokage's most trusted ninja. At Itachi's current rate of progress, he would likely make Chunin within the year, and recruitment into the Anbu program would follow quickly. It was entirely possible that Itachi could make Anbu captain within the next 5 years, destroying that Hatake brat's record. The Uchiha should be the best in all things, and Itachi was the perfect example of this. Sasuke, on the other hand, was not. Fugaku honestly didn't know where he had gone wrong. He had married a strong kunoichi from within the clan, the only female in his generation to completely master her Sharingan. Their first child had proven the strength of the Uchiha blood, perfect scores in the academy, graduation in a single year, a perfect mission record, and well on his way to fulfilling the service and mission requirements for Chunin. Sasuke, their second child, should have followed in his brother's footsteps. Instead, Sasuke was barely above average. A bitter disappointment. Useless. The Jinchuriki, on the other hand, was already being compared to Itachi. If it was in chakra or raw power, Fugaku would have chalked it up to the tailed beast sealed into the child. But no, it was his intelligence and learning speed that rivaled or even outstripped Itachi's. Coupled with the rate he could heal himself, the kid might even prove to be more powerful than Itachi, if you left out the Sharingan, of course. With the Sharingan, it was no contest. Fugaku sighed, and refocused on the task at hand. While the Hokage had been out dealing with the attack on the Yamanaka household and removing the Kumo ninja from Konoha, Fugaku had been scrambling to shore up his hold on the civilian side of the council. The civilians most likely to fill the now vacant seats on the council had proven difficult to sway until he promised them a few off-the-books missions from an Uchiha ninja in addition to the traditional perks provided by his police force. Once he had secured their votes, the next vote for the temporary ninja seats on the council would go his way, and he would have the majority of the votes on the council following his lead. From there, it was simply a matter of time until he was Hokage. Now he just needed a ninja capable of handling those missions while keeping it quiet, as Shinji and Yudai had proven unsuitable to continuing to work for him in that capacity. Fugaku drummed his fingers on his desk as he reviewed possible ninja for the jobs. It was so difficult finding good help these days. Same time. Kurama compound. Thank you for agreeing to return to active duty, Tetsuya-sama. Tetsuya nodded solemnly. The 60-year-old shinobi had been retired for nearly a decade now, and had refused to return to active duty in the wake of the tailed beast's attack, instead focusing on managing clan affairs. This arrangement had allowed the younger members of the clan to perform more missions, and so had been permitted, though a few members of the clan resented him for it. The opportunity now before the Kurama clan was too important to ignore, however. For the sake of the clan, I could not do otherwise, he said. Murakumo, the current head of the Kurama clan, smiled. Yes, once Takao and Madoka graduate early next year, the Kurama clan will finally have the requisite numbers to obtain a permanent seat on the Konoha Council. The prestige alone will greatly increase our fortunes and further secure our place within Konoha. Ankai, Murakumo's brother, nodded in agreement. It's been galling to watch the Uchiha flaunt their status even when so many of their members barely know which end of the kunai to hold. It's about time the Kurama finally got a say in the direction of this village. May 12, 338 NE. Land of Whirlpools. A tall, thin ninja wrapped in a cloak that obscured the ninja's entire body gave the courier ninja his fee and sent him on his way. The ninja waited until the courier was out of range before leaving the area, beginning the 30-minute trek back to shelter. Only once the ninja was inside and the door sealed did she dispel the henge that concealed her form. We've got another letter, the woman said, tearing open the envelope. Seeing the letter was encoded, she set to work deciphering the letter's contents. Another job already? Don't we have enough funds for now? Her companion, another woman, asked. She was currently working her way through her sword form, her body dripping with sweat as she flowed around the room, her blade flashing through the air with deadly grace and precision. Let's see. Oh, it's from, she cut off with a snarl, her face tightening with fury. Her hands began to shake as she continued to read the letter. What? What is it? The first woman thrust a letter towards her companion and stalked off to a corner. Her fists tightened and her knuckles cracked, but she stopped herself from lashing out at the wall. They couldn't afford to destroy the hideout they were in at the moment, after all. Silence permeated the room for a long minute before the second woman dropped the letter, letting it fall to the floor. "Tsunade," she growled, unconsciously hefting her blade, "tell me again why I can't just kill them all. I'm having a hard time remembering that myself right now, Kushina." They shared an angry glance, each wishing they had something to lash out against, something to distract themselves. Kushina was the first to break. "What have they done to my son?" she cried, falling to her knees. Tsunade hurried to her side, wrapping her in a hug as the other woman wailed. She couldn't find anything to say. She also couldn't stop the little ball of fear that settled in her gut, a fear that said that even when they finally got Naruto back, it might already be too late. Chapter 10: The Last Straw. October 28th, 339 NE. 5:00 p.m. Fugaku's private office. "What do you mean they graduated early?" Fugaku snarled. Both Madoka and Takao Kurama successfully passed the graduation test 2 years early, and have already passed the second genin test with their squads. With Tetsuya Kurama's reactivation, the Kurama clan now have. "I know, damn it. Those pathetic little upstarts think they deserve to be a permanent clan on the council," Fugaku sneered. His expression soon turned pensive. As things stood, the Kurama would get their seat, and they would certainly not be voting Fugaku's way. This wasn't the first setback he'd suffered recently either. The Ogawa clan had been making waves in Konoha this past year. They were a relatively new ninja clan with strong civilian roots that had proven to be very effective in the field. Their connections with civilian council members were strong enough to secure one of the temporary seats despite Fugaku's wishes, and they too held no love for the Uchiha. The Ogawa seat Fugaku had let slide, if reluctantly. Even if it made completely dominating the council less likely, he would still have the simple majority he needed to secure his election as Hokage. But the loss of another seat to the Kurama changed things considerably. Without that vote, he would only have the 10 civilian votes, and perhaps a single seat on the ninja side. The Anbu commander, the Jounin commander, and the other 8 ninja seats would all certainly vote against him. The risk that he could lose the vote of the last remaining temporary seat, or one of the civilian votes, was far too high now that his advantage had dwindled to a single vote. Barely a month remained before the 5-year term ended, and now, when he was so close to securing his ambition, everything was beginning to slip away from him. The Uchiha who had delivered the message wisely withdrew as Fugaku began to leak killing intent, shutting the door behind him. That was fortunate, as Fugaku would not have appreciated any witnesses to the tantrum he indulged in shortly thereafter. Several minutes later, Fugaku collapsed in his chair, still fuming. The Kurama clan specialized in genjutsu, and with the Sharingan's ability to detect such illusions, the Kurama's strongest power was absolutely useless. Fugaku by himself could probably take on most of their so-called ninja without even breaking a sweat. Even idiots like Yudai and Shinji could take out any of the Kurama at their leisure. The Kurama only just met the requirements to become a permanent clan anyway, if even one of their ninja retired or... Fugaku suddenly shot to his feet. The answer was so simple and obvious, it surprised him that it took this long to come up with it. It was also illegal and even treasonous, but that sort of thing had long ago ceased to matter to him. In his mind he already considered himself the next Hokage, and the Hokage often had to make difficult sacrifices for the good of the village. What did it matter if one insignificant genin died in an unfortunate training accident, compared to the prosperity he would bring to the village once he was Hokage? It didn't matter at all. Same day. 6:00 p.m. Uchiha Training Grounds. Sasuke threw another punch at the log post that was sticking up out of the ground. His small fist and the meager power he could muster did not make the satisfying thunk the older ninja produced, but he persisted anyway. Itachi and Aizen trained like this, so he would too. Another 10 punches and he would run another lap around the training field. His mother would be calling him home in 30 minutes, and he wanted to get as much training as possible and while he had the time. He wanted to impress Itachi with his progress when his older brother returned from his latest mission. Sasuke always got a warm glow of satisfaction when his mother and older brother praised his efforts, even if his progress paled before Itachi's own. He had also heard the other ninja children had started their own training regimens shortly after that incident, and he wanted to keep up with them as well. He wasn't certain if he could call them friends when he only saw them once or twice a month, but he always enjoyed the time he spent with them. No one ever compared him to Itachi then, and even Naruto, acknowledged by one and all as the strongest of their group, never made him feel weak or unwanted. They didn't care that he had yet to awaken his own Sharingan. Thoughts of gaining his Sharingan brought his brother's words to mind. The Sharingan is a tool, nothing more. It is the ninja that makes it dangerous. Or not. His father said something else entirely though, constantly reminding Sasuke that it is the Sharingan that sets the Uchiha above all other ninja. An Uchiha without a Sharingan is barely an Uchiha at all. Even as young as he was, Sasuke understood the underlying message. If he wanted his father's acknowledgement, he would have to awaken his own Sharingan as Itachi had. His mother said nothing on the matter. Sasuke wasn't sure what he himself thought, but he knew that whoever was right, activating his Sharingan would make him stronger. Maybe then he could finally move closer to Itachi's level. Maybe then people would praise him as they praised Itachi and Naruto. Maybe then his father would look at him. Same day. 9:00 p.m. Hokage's office. What is so important that you had to bring me back to work, Dragon? I'd actually managed to catch up on my paperwork early, and was hoping to spend some time with my grandson, the Hokage said, visibly annoyed. My apologies, Hokage-sama, but the ANBU squads watching over the Uchiha compound reported some suspicious activity, and given the nature of that activity I thought it best to inform you immediately, Dragon said, bowing. The Hokage sighed, but settled into his chair. All right, let's hear it. Around 6 this evening, Katsuro Uchiha, who as you know is Fugaku's newest Black Ops ninja, was called into Fugaku's office. Shortly thereafter, he left the Uchiha compound and observed the training sessions of Takao and Madoka Kurama. He followed them home, and spent nearly an hour observing the Kurama's security before returning to the Uchiha compound. Sarutobi's face was a mixture of fury and disbelief. He wouldn't, he growled. It appears that, in fact, he would, Dragon replied. I knew he had spent a lot of effort trying to lock up council votes, but to stoop that low, Sarutobi said. Even for an Uchiha, the man is despicable, Dragon spat. The ANBU surveillance on Fugaku over the last year and a half had proven most enlightening. Fugaku routinely bribed civilian councilors and took black ops jobs that did not meet the standards of village conduct set forth by the Hokage. It had actually come as a surprise, if a pleasant one, when they determined that Fugaku apparently only trusted a small subset of his clan with his personal agenda, a group that did not include his own wife. Do you have any idea when Katsuro will strike? Other than the obvious deadline of the council elections, no. Given Fugaku's pattern of arranging accidents for his victims, we can determine that Katsuro will most likely attempt something during a training session, although it is unknown how he plans to avoid the Jounin instructor. His interest in the Kurama's security suggests he may try a more direct approach, although sabotaging the Genin's equipment is also possible. After waiting in silence for several minutes as the Hokage considered the information, Dragon volunteered an idea on how to handle the situation. We could arrest Fugaku now, the ANBU commander said. We've already gathered enough evidence to prove criminal activity, even if we don't have anything to prove his more treasonous actions. We could, but the Uchiha would never stand for it, and the civilians would likely riot if their beloved chief of police was taken into custody. That's why I haven't acted before now. No, we need to catch him in the act. We need to catch Katsuro alive, and get a confession out of him. With attempted murder of a fellow ninja, especially a child freshly graduated from the academy, even the civilians will abandon Fugaku. Hopefully the other Uchiha will back down at that point, but I'm not going to play games anymore if Fugaku is ready to go this far. If the Uchiha still resist, they will be taken down, Sarutobi said firmly. I want ANBU shadowing Takao and Madoka at all times. I'll personally contact the Kurama and apprise them of the situation. Wherever and whenever Katsuro makes his move, we'll be ready. Understood, Hokage-sama, Dragon said, bowing again. Even through the distortion of the mask, the ANBU commander's voice carried equal measures of determination and eagerness. November 7th, 339 NE. 10:45 p.m. A small tavern in the Land of Water. They've managed to keep it quiet so far, hoping that they can find him, or that he'll turn up on his own. But the Mizukage has gone missing. Only his strict discipline, strong nerves, and sincere desire not to waste such expensive sake kept Jiraiya from spitting his drink all over the table. Missing? Like missing mean missing? I don't think so. They don't seem angry about it, just worried. Well, shit. No kidding. Yugura is very popular, and the Kagaya in particular are not going to take it kindly if someone assassinated him. Course, it's kinda scary to think that someone could actually assassinate a Kage without some huge battle going down. Just goes to show even the best can be taken down, I guess. Jiraiya nodded in agreement, but inwardly his thoughts were heading in a very different direction. Yugura wasn't just a Kage, he was a Jinchuriki. Even if he didn't have the absurd healing Minato's kid did, he would heal faster than most, and poisons would have a hard time doing anything to him. He didn't rely on his larger chakra capacity to spam ninjutsu, either. Yugura was a taijutsu specialist and an absolute nightmare with that hooked staff of his. If anything, ninjutsu was his backup skill. Basically, there wasn't a chance in hell someone took him out without a fight. Anything else? Jiraiya asked, already fishing around in his pockets for some coins to pay for the sake, and the information. Some more freelance ninja groups have started cropping up lately. What, like the sword and hammer you never shut up about? Hey, those guys kick ass. Did you hear what they did over in the Land of Grass? Yeah, I know. Doesn't change the fact that they're probably missing Nin from somewhere. Anyway, what about the new groups? Well, there's the Music Note guys. They wear headbands like official ninja, and I think they're trying to start up their own village. They're still small fry right now, but I hear they're willing to take the jobs most ninja won't touch. They mostly operate near the Land of Hot Water. Ah, I remember those hot springs, and the ladies in them, Jiraiya said, a lecherous grin crossing his face. Speaking of, when's your next book coming out? Hey, you can't rush genius. It takes a lot of careful research to craft such perfect works of art, Jiraiya said indignantly. And that info is useless, I already heard about them 6 months ago. Wait, they're not the only ones. There's these guys in black cloaks with red clouds on them that have been popping up everywhere. They were looking around the Land of Water 2 weeks ago. Don't try to tell me you've heard about that before. Jiraiya frowned thoughtfully. He had heard of them, but nothing as fresh as that. He'd started getting reports of them through his network nearly 2 years ago, but the information was often months old by the time it reached him. You got descriptions? Did they take any jobs? Jiraiya pressed. His informant shifted uncomfortably. No. The cloaks and the straw hats was all anyone could say. They just wander around for a bit, then leave. Then why are you so certain they're ninja? Because they scare the shit out of everyone without even trying, that's why. Damn it. That's the same thing everyone else said. So far these guys had been spotted in 9 different countries, but they had yet to actually do anything, and yet everyone took note of them and reported it. No names, no descriptions, no jobs taken, nothing. There really wasn't anything to report, and normally he wouldn't even waste his time with information that vague. So why did he get the feeling it was so important? November 15th, 339 NE. -2:00 p.m. Yamanaka residence. Ino was red-faced and sweaty, and her clothes were covered in dirt and leaves, but she paid her disheveled state no mind. She was focused on her current task, slowly but surely inching her way up a tree in her backyard using only her feet. The chakra exercise was incredibly difficult for her, but she persevered and was slowly but steadily making progress. Naruto was sitting on the ground nearby, surrounded by odd bits of black debris. He held a leaf on the back of his hand, and his brow was furrowed in concentration. After several seconds, he slowly turned his hand over so that the leaf and the back of his hand were facing the ground. Almost instantly the leaf caught fire, and he muttered a curse as the newest lump of ash settled onto the ground. He snatched up another leaf and began again. Ino's control slipped, and she landed on the ground with a loud thump. She stood up with a small groan and rubbed her rear, muttering under her breath. You better not let Ka-san catch you saying that, Naruto said distractedly. Yeah, Ino replied. She eyed the tree for a moment, but decided to take a break. Her reserves were running a little low anyway. She plopped down next to Naruto, not caring that she landed on several burnt leaves. How's it going, little brother? Naruto growled, a surprisingly animalistic sound issuing from his throat. It's not. Ino leaned over and patted him on the head, rubbing her hand through his hair and messing it up even more than it already was. Even geniuses can't be great at everything. Besides, I'm sure you'll get it eventually. Naruto gave her a sour look before he turned his attention back to his newest leaf. Another few seconds and a fresh lump of ash hit the ground. I take it you had similar problems with spontaneously combusting foliage? Ino stuck her tongue out at him, then sat back, leaning on her hands. No, but I don't have the chakra reserves of a Jounin either. Why don't you try something a little bigger or heavier? Or at least something less likely to catch on fire? Ino suggested. Naruto shrugged. Shizune-chan insists that I use leaves. She says using something heavy won't teach me the same skills using a leaf will. Ino pouted. She knew it was silly, but she still felt a little jealous whenever Naruto talked about Shizen. Naruto's borderline obsession with becoming a Mednin complemented Ino's own decision to follow her father's path of mind healing, but she felt sometimes like she was competing with the Mednin for Naruto's attention. It felt terribly selfish of her after everything Naruto had done for her, and she made sure to squash those instincts whenever they rose up, but the feeling was still there. Well, why don't you try something in the middle then? It had seemed like an obvious suggestion to her, even if she mostly offered it out of a desire to prove Shizen wrong, but Naruto's dumbstruck expression seemed to indicate otherwise. Kushu's troubles with human chakra control stemmed from the inescapable fact that, despite the body he currently occupied, he was not human. His Yuki was the dominant force within the body, both in quantity and quality. Whenever he tried even this simplest of exercises, his Yuki would completely overwhelm the human chakra and produce unpredictable and often destructive results. He was currently attempting to completely isolate the human chakra from his Yuki, and use only human chakra in the exercise, but that was proving nigh impossible. Always before he had simply surrounded the human chakra with his Yuki, and essentially carried it wherever it needed to go. Despite his presence in the body, he only had the most tenuous of connections with the chakra it contained. He could feel it, and even move it about as it were his own Yuki to a limited extent, but once it was completely isolated from his Yuki it became dormant again. Thus his current situation: if he used Yuki, the leaf burned; if he used just chakra, nothing happened. But hearing Ino's suggestion had given him an idea for an entirely different approach, and he wondered why it had never occurred to him before. Rather than surrounding the chakra with Yuki, what if he attempted to blend the two energies together? A small amount of Yuki mixed into the chakra would theoretically increase the potency only slightly but still allow him to control it, if not nearly as well as pure Yuki. From there the control exercise, and eventually the incredible variety of human techniques, should be well within his reach. He dropped the leaf he was holding and brought his hands together in front of him, concentrating on the two different energies his body contained. Ino looked confused, but recognized the expression on his face and sat back, allowing him to think. Nearly a minute passed before a small bit of energy leaked out between his hands. It formed a rough sphere, wobbling to and fro and barely maintaining its shape. More important than the shape, though, was the color. Instead of the expected blue chakra, the energy had a clear purple tinge to it. Even as Ino leaned forward to look closer, the energy dissipated, but the way Naruto laughed told her that he was happy with that result. He jumped to his feet and pulled Ino into a hug. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You are absolutely brilliant, Ino-ne-chan, Naruto exclaimed. Ino had no idea what she had said that was so brilliant, but she wasn't about to turn down the praise, nor was she about to dismiss the incredibly satisfying knowledge that she had helped her little brother where Shizen had failed. November 17th, 339 NE. -1:30 p.m. Hokage's office. Katsuro is preparing to make his move, Hokage-sama. Takao Kurama's team is scheduled for full contact weapons practice this afternoon, and Katsuro has acquired a sharpened sword disguised to appear dull for Takao's opponent. He has also acquired a deadly poison and treated the blade. In addition, he has acquired several similarly disguised and poisoned kunai, apparently as a backup plan, Dragon reported. Not exactly subtle, is he? Still, it would be virtually impossible to trace this back to the Uchiha if he was successful, the Hokage mused. Very well, I want Katsuro taken into custody as soon as he makes the switch and taken to Tianai. Once we get enough evidence, we'll arrest Fugaku. We'll need to move quickly to make sure Fugaku doesn't have time to prepare. If we can catch him off guard, we may be able to take him in without a fight." "And if he is prepared?" Dragon asked. The Hokage's face became grim. "Then bloodshed may be unavoidable. If it comes to that, we may require some additional support, your brother, for instance." Dragon nodded. "He would be most eager to take part in this. He always complains that I get to have all the fun, and nothing would make him happier than to take down Fugaku personally." The Hokage snorted. "No doubt." Same day. 2:00 p.m. Hyuga Compound, Main House Training Area. Again, Hayashi Hyuga barked. Hinata slowly picked herself up off the mat and settled back into the stance for her family's famed and feared fighting style, the Juken, or gentle fist. Her feet slid apart, her right foot forward and her left back, while her hands mirrored her feet with her left hand forward in a guarding position and her right hand tucked close to her body. Hinata was currently wearing a thin blue shirt and loose black pants tied off with a white belt. She had several bruises already forming on her exposed arms, and the occasional wince as she moved showed she had similar injuries elsewhere. Her indigo hair hung loosely down to shoulder level, swaying slightly whenever she turned her head. Her pale lavender eyes were currently narrowed in determination. Hayashi examined her form for a long moment, then nodded in satisfaction. "Begin," he said. Hinata launched herself forward, her hands moving quickly and firmly as she dueled with her fellow student. Her opponent, her cousin Niji, was wearing an ivory shirt and matching shorts, and his hair, actually longer than Hinata's, was gathered into a ponytail that mimicked Hayashi's own style. He had far fewer bruises than Hinata, though he had not come out of their clashes unscathed. He was also wearing a bandana around his head, and was the only person in the room with his forehead covered. Niji's stance matched his cousin's as their hands flashed through the space between them, diverting or blocking each other's strikes as they battled. He slowly began to advance, forcing Hinata to retreat in order to maintain the distance between them. As her stance shifted, Niji suddenly darted to her weak side and struck, his hands blurring. It appeared for a moment as if he had won yet another bout before Hinata bent sideways, allowing Niji's hands to pass harmlessly above her as her own hands lashed out, touching several points on his chest. She was unable to maintain her position for long, however, as she lost balance and fell the rest of the way to the floor with a light thud, panting. Niji did not follow up on this opening, instead retreating several feet and settling back into his stance, similarly breathless. "Enough," Hayashi barked again, and strode onto the mat towards his two students. Niji relaxed out of his stance and moved to stand next to Hinata, looking down at her panting form. After a moment, he thrust out his hand. Hinata reached up and took it with her own, and Niji pulled her to her feet. "Thank you, Niji-san," Hinata said, slowly regaining control of her breathing. "Of course, Hinata-sama," Niji said, smiling. "You have improved remarkably in the last month. You would have completely disabled me in that last exchange." Hinata blushed slightly, but nodded. They both turned to face Hayashi as he knelt on the mat next to them, motioning for them to join him. Once they had settled into place, feet tucked under their bodies, backs straight and heads held high, he nodded firmly. "What did you do wrong in that last exchange?" he began. Niji spoke first. "I overextended on my strike, leaving myself open to a counterattack. My feet were also out of position, slowing my recovery time and preventing me from pivoting away from Hinata's attack," Niji said calmly. Hayashi smiled, pleased with Niji's response. "Correct. You were too eager to strike at the opening and did not position yourself properly before attacking. At your current level of skill and experience, you should never sacrifice mobility to strike at an opponent. As you just saw, even with one opponent it can lead to your downfall, and against multiple opponents it is an even worse mistake." "Yes, Hayashi-sama," Niji replied, bowing his head as he absorbed the advice. He was used to this post-training discussion and no longer had issues critiquing himself or accepting the advice that followed. He had seen for himself in the years since he began training that he improved far faster when he listened. Hayashi then turned to face Hinata expectantly. She blushed again, still unused to this sort of attention, especially when she was expected to criticize herself. After a moment, she offered her own hesitant analysis. I didn't recover properly when I dodged and fell?" she offered. Hayashi sighed softly, and relaxed his expression a little. It should not be a question, Hinata, he corrected. Still, you are correct. Like Niji, you focus too much on offense, and not enough on proper defensive positioning. It worked out in this instance, as your strikes would have disabled Niji, but you left yourself open to attack if you had failed or if other ninja were present during the battle. Hinata shrunk into herself slightly, but nodded in acknowledgement of his words. Hayashi was actually impressed. Despite her relative lack of confidence compared to Niji, this response was much better than what had happened at the end of their first training session. When Hayashi had slowly coaxed her into finding something wrong about her own performance, and then further explained what she had done wrong and why, she had ended up bursting into tears and running from the dojo. Hisana had ended up giving him a piece of her mind later that day, though his wife did understand what he was trying to do. She had also worked with Hinata over the last month, providing an outlet for Hinata's frustrations that complemented Hayashi's more stern approach. Hisana had also talked him into adjusting his own approach to these post-training discussions, and even Niji seemed happier with the new way of doing things. As you are both having difficulty on defense, I think our next session will focus on that. That said, you have both done very well in your training so far. Niji, your speed has continued to improve steadily, and your stance is generally very stable. The strength behind your blows is also very promising. With time, I think you will be able to penetrate your opponent's guard even during a frontal assault, which will serve you very well once you begin learning the 8 trigrams. Hinata, your speed is also improving steadily, and your flexibility is already impressive. If you focus on that, you will be able to easily slip around your opponent's guard and strike at vital points effortlessly. As your footwork improves, I think your mother will have some very interesting techniques to teach you, Hayashi said, smiling encouragingly. He spotted Hisashi lingering near the entrance to the dojo, and dismissed his 2 students for the day. Niji enthusiastically greeted his father, but was soon sent on his way as the 2 brothers had important business to discuss. It's happening today, Hisashi told his twin without preamble as the 2 began to walk through the Hyuga compound. They were both currently wearing the same outfit. The only difference between them was the headband that covered Hisashi's forehead, while Hayashi's was left bare. Hayashi's face grew tense at the news. When? Within the hour. Anbu have requested support from the other clans in case Fugaku intends to resist. The Hokage hopes a show of force will deter him, and we can get through this without bloodshed. And what does our Anbu commander think? Hisashi snorted. Not a chance in hell. Fugaku won't go down without a fight, even if he was alone, and knowing him, he won't be. I'm just glad Itachi is out on a mission right now. Really? I didn't think he was powerful enough to pose that sort of threat, Hayashi said quietly. He's not, yet. He'd do a lot of good in Anbu though, and things will go a lot smoother for him if he doesn't get caught up in this mess. By the time he gets back, everything will be settled one way or another. Mikoto appears clean, and the majority of the Uchiha have no part in Fugaku's madness, so there's hope that with Fugaku out of the way things will settle down quick enough. You know the Kurama aren't going to be satisfied with Fugaku's head alone. They've got a serious bone to pick with the Uchiha. That's for the Hokage and the council to figure out. You're on the council, idiot, Hayashi said, amused. Yeah, well, shut up, brother, Hisashi responded petulantly. They shared a quick laugh, but their faces gradually grew grim as they mentally prepared themselves for the coming conflict. Turning to face one another, they clasped forearms and pulled each other into a brotherly embrace. Be safe, they said, and parted ways. 2:30 p.m. Hokage's personal training grounds. Sarutobi surveyed the ninja who were currently preparing themselves to battle Fugaku Uchiha and any of his clan who supported him. Most of them hoped that their preparations would prove unnecessary, but none of them really believed Fugaku would allow himself to be arrested. The best-case scenario would be that Fugaku was quickly immobilized and that none of his clan fought against the arrest. To one side, nearly half of his entire Anbu force stood prepared, their masks the only feature distinguishing them from one another. Those who specialized in weapons or used other tools kept them hidden within their cloaks to avoid giving away any information to potential enemies. This gathering of such an elite force, comprised of some of the most powerful and experienced shinobi in all of Konoha, made for an intimidating sight. Dragon was moving through the group, making sure each squad knew their assigned roles and were prepared. Shizen stood near the Anbu, she and her personal team of Mednin loaded down with medical supplies. They would not be involved in any fighting, but would be doing their best to make sure no one died, on either side. Scattered around the clearing were representatives from the other clans of Konoha. Hayashi Hyuga had brought 8 members from his clan in addition to himself. Their gentle fist techniques would be invaluable in taking down opponents without killing them. The Hyuga's long-standing rivalry with the Uchiha had turned bitter in recent years, and all of the Hyuga appeared eager to commence with the mission. Inoichi Yamanaka, Shikaku Nara, and Chusa Akimichi stood together, conversing quietly. 3 other members of the Nara clan stood nearby, but Inoichi and Chusa were the only members of their clans present. That was understandable. While the Nara's shadow techniques were even more effective than the Hyuga's gentle fist at capturing opponents, the Yamanaka and Akimichi skills tended to be more dangerous and deadly, and very few in Inoichi's clan had the skill to utilize the mind transfer jutsu in the midst of battle. The infamous Ino Shikacho trio had honed their teamwork to an incredible level and were considered one of the most effective strike teams in Konoha's history, but their fellow clan members had been unable to replicate their clan head's success. Shibi Aburame had brought 5 members from his clan, and the way their identical outfits of high-collared trenchcoats and sunglasses hid nearly their entire bodies was as disconcerting in its own way as the appearance of the Anbu. The Aburame would be placed with the ambush teams. In open battle, the Uchiha's fire techniques would render the Aburame's insect-based jutsu highly ineffective. Some Inuzuka and her partner Kurama rounded out the collection of clan heads, accompanied by 4 members from her clan and their own canine partners. She had a slightly sour look on her face. Sim had not been pleased when told that her clan would be held in reserve in case the battle went badly or any Uchiha attempted to flee. Sarutobi had held firm on this point though. Even the weakest of the Inuzuka's jutsu tended to do serious damage to their targets, and he still wanted to preserve as many lives as possible. That Sim and her clan valued loyalty as highly as the Aburame valued honor also meant that the Inuzuka would accidentally go too far and end up killing opponents they might have incapacitated or disabled. The Kurama clan had wanted to take part as well. Literally every active shinobi ranked chunin or higher from the clan had volunteered. Sarutobi knew their presence would practically guarantee a fight, however, and he wasn't certain whether it would be the Kurama or the Uchiha that would strike the first blow. They had finally relented when the Hokage promised to strip the rank from any Kurama ninja who interfered with Fugaku's arrest, the threat of losing their chance at a permanent seat on the council sufficing to curb their bloodlust. Satisfied that all ninja involved in the operation were present, the Hokage flared his chakra, drawing the attention of the other ninja in the clearing. Everyone understands their roles in the operation, I trust? A chorus of affirmatives rang out, and he nodded in satisfaction. Very well. Move out, he said, and vanished in the shunshin. The other ninja followed quickly, and within seconds the clearing was completely empty.